I sure miss brother Preston Wilcox. I spent some serious quality time with him. I don't have to introduce you to him, just listen to him. I didn't take enough photographs of him. I should have taken more moving footage of him. I should have documented him much more. Like the time we both went to the Gil Scott-Heron concert. And after the show, we both went backstage and hugged Gil when Gil was physically ill. Like the time Preston, Charles Kenyatta, and myself walked around the old Autobahn Ballroom late after midnight one summer night, circling the building about 20 times, just walking and talking about Brother Malcolm. You talk about a man whose every waking and dreaming thought was about the freedom of black folks? Preston was hard to beat. He was one of the most freest, mature black men I've ever run across. I love Brother Preston, and he knew it because I told him so.
The AFRAM newsletter. Welcome to Like It Is. Preston Wilcox is a longtime community activist and publisher of the AFRAM newsletter. Welcome to Like It Is. Joined by the Reverend Preston Washington, pastor of Harlem's Memorial Baptist Church and head of Harlem Congregations for Community Improvement. Welcome to Like It Is. What is going on in the Harlem community? That's the name of the series. And I guess to go directly to the point of these questions that are being raised about HUDC, what do you have to say about these charges that are being bandied about?
I think one of the great tragedies of our time is the opportunity that we had to develop our community, and HUDC has done a tremendous job in helping to facilitate a certain attitude and ethos in our community to rebuild and to attract large businesses and to really stimulate economic growth. The 60 congregations that created Harlem Congregations for Community Improvement, HCCI, really grew out of a concern of Congressman Charles Rangel to allow HUDC to bring to the table your resident clergy persons across denominational lines. In the early years, I was privileged, Gil, to be named convener, and then I became chairman of what Mr. Cogsville made mention of earlier in this segment, of the Consortium for Central Harlem Development, and I also was simultaneously chairperson of the Board of Directors of Harlem Congregations for Community Improvement. And it was HUDC that stimulated the research and all of the technical assistance through a young man by the name of Lionel McIntyre to develop this concept of a comprehensive community development program. And we call it the Bradhurst Project.
So what do you say about these charges that are being carried out
Well,
here?
first of all, I'm not a court of law, and I'm not an auditor, and I'm not quite clear. But the implications that I'm detecting from the media is an attempt to basically discredit the Harlem leadership and perhaps even to find a way to essentially bring down Congressman Rangel. And the real tragedy of all of this is, number one, that our community has been almost totally dependent upon the rise and fall of individuals, and point two, that there have been a whole cross-section, a whole cadre of leaders. I grew up in Harlem, and I returned from, tremendous academic preparation to come back home. I pastored the Memorial Baptist Church on 115th Street, and I'm up there in the Bradhurst area every waking hour of my life I'm spending in Harlem seeking its recovery. And the unfortunate thing is, it is those persons, those pastors in these huge cathedrals struggling to keep their doors open to provide people with shelter and also to provide people with food. They have been ignored by the media. All of those activists in our community, those persons like Steve Lawrence, Jeffrey Canada, John Best, who really have stimulated a new imagination among our young people. And the unfortunate thing is, the venue of the clubhouse political dynamic, seeing that as the only venue for leadership development in our community is a little unfortunate. You look in the phone book and you ask, who is the Jewish leader? Or what person can we pop off and then bring the whole Jewish community down, and you will find not a soul? Because the Messianic image is, I think, what has got us really hung up.
Okay.
Harlem is such a wonderfully creative community. What happened to the report on the existing people? Those persons that stuck it out in Harlem, like Preston Wilcox and others, those persons that have continued to make contributions. And right now it's unfortunate that HUDC is being used as the whipping boy, so to speak. But I think the larger issue is, as Don Cogswell said earlier, what about the present and the future of Harlem?
Okay.
That's what concerns me.
All right, let me move to Preston Wilcox and hear what you have to say about this.
Well, first I want to say, Gil, that a lot of people ask me to say to you on air that we appreciate the fact that you never forgot from where you came, that you've always kept us at the forefront. And 1 o'clock on Sunday is a very important time in Harlem, the black community.
Yeah.
And I think that in response to what's going on here, that we tend to underestimate the value of Harlem to New York City, to the nation, and to the world. And there are people who think it can be integrated or wiped out. Those of us who walk the streets don't think that Harlem will ever disappear. We consecrated that area. Can you imagine a world without Harlem? It's like a world without black music, without great writers, and so I think that many of the people who are involved in leading Harlem are not a part of that understanding of Harlem's significance.
You think there's a gap between the leadership and the grassroots in Harlem?
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, the leadership is not really accountable to the grassroots. In fact, there's no structure to make that possible. There's no machinery other than to vote, you know.
Well, the machinery that we're discussing of late, the HUDC, presently, the zone. Wouldn't those be natural devices through which the leadership and the grassroots could really hook up?
Well, I don't think the current leadership of the Upper Manhattan zone even understands how to relate to the community. For instance, I've been around there for years. They've never called on me. I walk Harlem streets every day, and I never see them out there. I don't think they have a value of developing the local community. They seem to have a value of bringing people from the outside. I'm not sure they understand the significance of local residency economically, socially, culturally, politically, you know.
Okay, need to take a break. We'll be back with more right after this. Please stay with us.
So you guys have to feed
every morning.
I can't imagine starting my day without it.
Let me press you a little bit, Brother Wilcox, and ask you, do you think that the criticism is just limited to a lack of communication between the leadership in Harlem and the grassroots? Is there another grievance? What is being said in the community about these reports?
Well, essentially, people think that Harlem's being turned over to somebody else, turned over to outsiders, and that Harlem's being used almost as an Ellis Island employment agency for immigrants. You know, a lot of immigrants are in Harlem. A lot of businesses run by other people, where we are the major consumers. We're 100% of the consumership, and they don't hire anybody. You know.
Well, all right, let's open this to discussion. What do you have to say to those criticisms that you've just heard?
I think that those criticisms are legitimate. I think that there has been a disparity between the so-called leadership in Harlem and the grassroots. However, to say that people were in a position to turn things over to the outside, I think that that's an issue that needs to be seriously researched, because it is a concern of all of us to raise the question, who will control the destiny of Harlem? Here is the rub. agencies that have been around for years and years, but 97% of the people in Harlem are renting their apartments. So we have no home ownership class. That ought to have been a major concern for the HUDC, which is what Don Cogswell mentioned, I think, earlier about 110th Street. But the fact that it took the banks 8 years to finally fund it, we have to raise the issue, what are the financial institutions really seriously committed to about Harlem? The other issue, just want to say quickly, is that the issue of the economic survival of Harlem, as Preston Wilcox said, is developing a cadre, a class of entrepreneurs that are locally based, that go to sleep in the community, that bank in the community, that spend their money in the community. Somebody, whoever the gatekeepers were, they did not mind the store. And the empowerment zone was set up specifically to create a model similar to what we're doing in Bradhurst, where you deal with comprehensive community revitalization. You must build a strong business class and provide them with the necessary technical assistance. You must provide decent, affordable housing. You have to address the issue of security. And you have to deal with the issue of education of our children and quality of life and jobs creation. If we're not talking that language, whether who shot John, who did what to whom, is really a moot issue. Tomorrow we will wake up and find out that Harlem indeed is not the black cultural capital of the world any longer.
All right, let me ask you, what percentage of the Harlem community, this is your turf and you did the analyses, what percentage of the Harlem community is owned by Harlemites? The land?
A very small percentage, extremely. Let me tell you, in 1979, 65% of the land in Harlem was owned by the city of New York. I mean, the city of New York is a large landowner within our community.
Well, how can you have any real empowerment if Harlemites don't control the land and own the land?
Well, that's what has to be changed, and that's also the scary part of it. And let me just mention, Harlem is faced with a lot of economic pressure. To the north of Harlem, Washington Heights is overcrowded. They got a lot of problems there. They're spreading south. To the south of Harlem, north of 96th Street, it's starting to be over. All those condos, etc., are now filling up. And then to the west of Harlem, you have Columbia University and City College, all of which is coming towards central Harlem and East Harlem, and the only vacant land is in central Harlem and East Harlem. That's where it's at. And that's where the pressure is starting to occur.
In retrospect, would HUDC have been better disposed to try to facilitate land ownership on the part of Harlemites?
Yeah, I think the problem was the city of New York owned the land. I mean, every time, not every time, but many times we would do a plan for development, and in the middle of that development of the program, the land was released through an RFP to somebody else. Now that happened over and over and over again. Now, one of the reasons the Bradhurst plan became so important is that development program brought the ministers, it brought the business community, it brought everything that Preston Washington had mentioned all together. And we collectively said, we want to do the development of this area, and this land we want to turn over to our developers, and we want to direct what is going on within that community. That was the power of that.
What do you say to that, Mr. Wilcox?
What I would say is that there's no interaction between the people who are planning our community and the people who are trying to make Harlem the important place that it is. I'll give you an example of the attitude toward the Nation of Islam in Harlem is, I would say, negative. You know, the mayor, I feel, has a negative attitude toward them. Yet we know they have the best security force in the country. We wouldn't have a drug problem if the NOI was providing the security in the housing projects. And it's almost as though they want us to have a drug problem. The community would be, would like to end the drug problem. For instance, the thing that happened on 125th Street with Copeland's. Here's a very important establishment in our community, and this is a gentleman who hired people who ordinarily would not be able to get a job under normal competitive circumstances. And so he has a rehabilitative force going in his organization. And he ends up in a situation where he has a very high rent leased by McDonald's, and with all the so-called power in our community, nobody could get McDonald's to say, listen, this is an important institution. So it's just not wiping out one restaurant. They're saying something to us about the fabric of Harlem when the leadership cannot stop them from tampering with somebody like Copeland's.
Okay.
You understand that?
You're not difficult to follow. We need to take a break. We'll be back. I want to continue with you, Preston Wilcox, and find out what has the community been saying about 125th Street? How do they feel about what's going on and what has been going on in 125th Street?
Well, there's a great sadness about what happened to the vendors. See, most of the vendors were black men supporting their families, and it looked as though the local leadership was involved with the mayor and helped to wipe them off the 125th Street.
Why?
Well, our analysis is that the merchants were fearful of dealing with the black male vendors who were in front of their stores, because it's a fact that white men fear black men. And so what they did, they went to the politicians to help them deal with vendors in front of the stores. And if they really respected our community, they'd walk out and say, listen, brother, I don't want you selling tapes in front of my business. And then developing some kind of rapport. Now, the other thing, there was no effort to organize the vendors so they could police themselves. They never got the credibility to be able to say, all right, we're going to decide who's here, who's there. There was none of that, you know, genuine effort. But what they do, 116th Street, they provided money, they set up, they provided money to the African market on 116th Street, which they never gave to the vendors on 125th Street.
But Mr. Wilcox, Harlemites never owned Harlem, and Mr. Coxville just said so. We don't own the land. So how could that be corrected?
Well, it seems to me that anybody who wants to help Harlem would try to find a way to help Harlemites own Harlem.
So are you suggesting that these agencies that we've been looking at have not done that?
Oh, I would say no, they haven't. No. I mean, not to the extent that they could have, you know.
Yes, sir.
Well, I think look, the city of New York owns the land, most of the land. Okay. We do have, back in the olden days, we had landlords who owned the land, and but the city has taken a lot of that property back. There has to be, and that's one of the reasons for the Bradhurst plan under Preston Washington's leadership, a way of securing that land from the city. And I think that was a major step that took place in Bradhurst. That's the only thing you can do right now.
But in facilitating this process of getting the land from the city, could not a joint venture have been erected so that Harlemites could be a part of that acquisition rather than the downtown entities that you
But that's what I was talking about. When I mentioned the Bradhurst plan, I mentioned us designating developers. They end up having control of that land.
And
that's what they have to do.
And I think, Gil, that's the key element, is when the community is involved in the development, and when there is a ground-up process of full participation, because, see, one of the key elements here is not only accessibility to the resources, but it is an accountability issue of the community looking to our leaders as brokers in bringing the banks and the insurance companies and the other financial institutions to guarantee that those institutions respect us, respond to us. Now, they said to us all along, you people can't develop Harlem yourselves, so that's why you need us. And that's the name of the game right now. They're saying, see, we gave you all these millions of dollars, we probably stole some, and therefore we're going to get you out the way, we're going to scandalize you, put you out of business, and now we will come in and we will rescue you, indeed, rescue us from what? From a colony that we are. With the Bradhurst Project, we have put to work 17...
Who owns the Bradhurst Project?
The congregations and the community. Because it was city-owned property, we worked a deal with then Mayor Edward R. Koch. He signed a memorandum of understanding. I had the opportunity to sign in behalf of the community. First time in the history of this city where a MOU finally was given a power to a community group. This is the clergy, along with the business people and a cross-section of our local leadership. This was a grounds-up experience, which incidentally the Empowerment Zone legislation was based upon the success of the Bradhurst plan. And we put 17 African-American, Latino, and women architects to work, full-time involvement in creating 35 opportunities for African-American and other minority contractors. And what we have happen is $100 million of construction financing in Bradhurst.
This is housing.
This is, well, let me
essentially
finish.
Housing.
But it's essentially housing, but then we have to look at all of the other supportive services. When we talk about the continuity of services, we have crisis intervention counseling, we have job training programs, we have computer labs, and now, here is the rub. Now that we've done that, where there has been no evidence of impropriety, where there has been an excellent track record, now the city of New York, for all intent and purposes, has basically defunded us. They're playing games in a way, because now it is very clear that the Northern Harlem area is the last developable part of the Manhattan Island. And they're telling us, thank you very much for what you've done. You've helped stabilize the community. You've helped to restore it. Now, see you later. And the 145th Street Pathmark Supermarket crisis is a case in point.
All right. We'll go into that and more, but we do need to take still another break. Time flies, doesn't it?
Hi.
1997 Mercury Mountaineer.
Don Cogsville, I really do not have the specific information. I'm not leveling the charges at you. Others have been making those charges, and it remains for them to come on in subsequent programs and itemize and specify their criticisms of your performance and that of HUDC. But my question is a larger one, and that is, will Harlem be consigned, given what happened with HUDC and what is happening with the zone, to be essentially, will the Harlemite essentially be a tenant, always, in his own community?
I don't believe so. I think that community has the leadership, and that leadership will develop, and it will grow, and it will figure out a way to keep the land in this community. But it has to be at the grassroots level as well.
But I mean, it's going to be a bonanza, and it's coming around the corner. We see it now. Now is not the time to think about that kind of investment. It should have happened some time ago, someone might say to you.
Well, I mean, I understand the pressures, as I mentioned, the pressures on that community. But the only thing we have, one of our problems, we do not have a strong business community. We do not have business people who can invest $1 million, $5 million, and $10 million. What we have are people. And the people have to come together, the churches, the elected officials. That's what has to happen. I'm afraid it's more of a, see, this is a policy issue. It's not just an economic development issue. Since the land is owned by the city of New York, a lot of it, then it's a policy issue that we can deal with to some degree, with the mayor and with other people. But it's not like private buying from the private sector. It is city-owned property.
But some might say we had a Harlemite who was elected mayor. Why couldn't that have happened under his watch?
Some of it did happen under his watch. For example, Ed Koch signed a memorandum of understanding with us but didn't give us a dime. Dave Dinkins facilitated more than $35 million to jumpstart the economic recovery of the Northern Harlem area, which we call BRAD.
Recovery, yes, but ownership.
Ownership is what it is, because...
Was $35 million...
That's correct.
Expended towards purchasing land?
Toward the purchase of land, which most of it was city-owned property, so that wasn't an issue. It was the question of the rehabilitation of the land and turning those properties into the hands of the congregations
Did
of
it
Harlem.
happen?
It happened.
Where?
It happened on 145th Street. One need only go between 7th and 8th Avenue and to go up in the northern Harlem area and see the work that's going. We've done 1,200 units of affordable housing owned and operated by the congregations in the Harlem community. And, and if you go and look at what Dr. Y.T. Walker has done at the Canaan Baptist Church of Christ, they have over 1,000 units of housing. If you look at Dr. Moran Weston, who's now retired, St. Philip's Episcopal Church, that's the same thing. They've developed over 1,000 units of housing.
So is it safe then to conclude that the majority of land which was city-owned is now in the hands of Harlemites?
No, it's safe to say that the majority of land that's city-owned is either vacant or else it is semi-occupied, and the city of New York is probably owns about 75% of the housing stock in Harlem.
Well, what about access to that property for the Harlemite?
Well,
Is that feasible?
yeah, it's an issue of everybody coming together and trying to put as much pressure as we can on the city to get the city to provide the land to institutions like Preston Washington's Church. That's what has to happen.
What do you say?
Can't do any other way.
Isn't one of the problems that there's no sense that we own Harlem? There's a sense that Harlem can be owned by anybody else. There's an attitude that there's something wrong if you say you love Harlem, like you keep other people out. You know, you understand that?
Yeah, there's no question.
And I think that a lot of the people who work in those positions have no identity with Harlem.
I think though that 75% or approximately of the land in Harlem is owned by the city of New York, then it is incumbent upon our present mayor, Mayor Giuliani, and his administration to facilitate the movement of that property. There's several different options. First of all, there's the tenant interim lease program, where residents living in city-occupied buildings, they can actually purchase their apartments for approximately $250. But it is incumbent upon the people living in those inadequately managed and operated city-owned buildings that are occupied to take the initiative and buy those buildings. And it's up to the city to facilitate and remove all the red tape to turn over the ownership of those properties to the residents.
Are there any agencies that exist in Harlem where Harlemites could get this information? It seems like a lot of things are available, but Harlemites don't know about it.
Yeah. So we don't have machinery in our community to take control of our own lives. The thing he mentioned about public housing, I did a study recently, identified in 22 housing projects, there's $2,800,000 that the tenants own and security deposits. That's $2,800,000. Most people don't even know about it. And the other thing, you know, public housing tenants are not giving any information about the value of their total rental payments or what the expenses are each month. So there's a process, I believe, that's organized to keep the community blinded about its own potential, and then to take advantage, you know, to create the conditions and then do what they want to do.
I just want to mention one thing.
It's got to be quick.
There are two elements, two lines, ways we have to go. One is residential, one is commercial. On the commercial side, we have to have joint ventures. We have to work, whatever comes in that community, we have to make sure that we participate in it.
Okay.
On the other side, then we have to figure out a way to work with the city to get ownership as well.
I told you what this would mean.
Yes.
We're out of time. But I do thank each and every one of you for being our guests on Like It Is. Of course, this discussion will go on, so stay tuned in succeeding editions of Like It Is. Thanks for being with us.
Videotape copies of our two-part series with Judge Bruce Wright and transcripts of our weekly programs are available. For more information, contact Hyperscribe, LLC, 1535 Grant Street, Denver, Colorado, 80203. Russian fax with credit card, call 1-800-ALL-NEWS. Transcripts are $4. VHS tapes of Judge Bruce Wright, parts 1 and 2, are $44.95, and that includes shipping.
Listen, ask you a question? See, these are two students from Columbia School of Journalism. Yes. And they want to interview me while I'm looking at this. This and this.
Do I have to show you?
Yeah. Say it again? Huh?
They are from the Columbia University.
Yeah, oh yeah, the students at Columbia.
So what are you to do now?
What?
What are you to do now? You want to have a look around here?
Yeah, well, oh yeah, I live and work in Harlem. I used to teach at Columbia. And they're doing a story on Harlem.
On Harlem.
And this is where Malcolm was, so I just want to film this while they're talking.
Yeah,
Okay.
sure.
Yeah, he's going to let us see this area. All right. First, I want to thank you for letting us come in. And we're standing in the vestibule of the Audubon Ballroom Auditorium, where on February 21st, 1965, my son David came to me and said, "Dad, the TV said they just killed Malcolm." And I was sitting home grading papers or something. And I remembered that I had taken my son to, and tried to educate him about what was going on. And the thing I remember most, from that moment on, I decided to study the question, who really killed Malcolm X? Because the conventional wisdom was that it was another black-on-black crime, like the black Muslims killing on one of their own. And if you remember, when Martin was killed, the black students rioted all over the country because they said, here's a man who's nonviolent, and they kill him. You know. And it was obvious that there were no blacks who were directly involved in pulling the trigger. So the black students rioted all over the country. When Malcolm was assassinated, there was no big uproar. You know, a lot of people came to see his body and so forth, but there wasn't the public reaction to the loss of this great martyr. And if you look here, this building has had many uses over the years. The wall labels tell you about it. And then they have this little panel, Malcolm X lives. Yet Malcolm's assassination put this building on the international map. And we used to have dances here before, you know, occasionally. But it was not considered to be a center of Harlem life, or did we ever see it as something that we wanted to preserve in the interest of our own culture. But the assassination of Malcolm X lives, gave it a special place in the history of Harlem, because here was a man, more than any other man in my lifetime, who told white people the truth about whom they were, yet he did it with a profundity of love and caring that is unbelievable. Unbelievable. On some level, I don't like to compare he and Martin, because I think of he and Martin as being blood brothers, as close as two human beings could be, who never really worked that closely together. But they were always in search of one another. They believed that each one of their own contributions was important, because both of them lived and they had two different methods of trying to achieve the same goal. And so, Martin was trying to aggressively expose white violence against.
Is there anything else here that we should look at?
Say, oh, by the way, a statue has been built of Malcolm, life-size. I have a picture of it. I'll show it to you. In fact, if you want, I can introduce you to the girl who did it.
Okay.
And it's going to be sitting here one of these days.
Oh, really?
And we also would like to put something like this in a Harlem community because, like Harlem is the only community where people walk in and do what they want to do without talking with the leaders. And so I have a great concern, and I'm going to move on the issue myself. I've been trying to get a hold of this guy Gibson, whom they hired to run the place, and he's probably their boy rather than our boy. Did you get that Malcolm X thing?
Yeah.
Good, very good. He wanted me to get out of there. It was getting hot, right?
Let's go around the front.
Okay. All right. Oh, yeah, come on around this way.
Preston, if you could talk about maybe,
There's a,
you could talk about maybe what you'd like to see for the future of Harlem?
well, the Columbia University, in my judgment, makes a lot of money off of Harlem, profit. And so I was at Columbia in 1968 with a bus. I remember the Ford Foundation gave Columbia $10 million to address this relationship to Harlem. And some of us at Columbia decided we ought to ask Ford to give us $10 million to prevent Columbia, to be able to confront whatever they were going to do. Of course, we never got it. And I don't think that the relationship with Columbia and Harlem has changed, other than the fact that Columbia is getting richer now than it was in 1968 in relation to Harlem. And I just think there's something ungodly about that kind of relationship. With all this kind of a talent, why isn't Harlem more directly empowered to help itself? For instance, many of the black doctors work for Columbia. So they become tools of Columbia rather than representatives of Harlem. And it's like what happened in Negro baseball. Negro baseball leagues had their own leagues. Jackie Robinson goes into the majors, and all the Negro leagues collapse because, quote, integration, from pretty white control. And so I have a great deal of concern about that. You know, if Columbia really respected Harlem and the contribution that Malcolm X has made to the world, why wasn't this building more directly renovated to reflect that? You saw that they had that little thing on Malcolm X Lives, as though what everybody else did was of equal importance. And it wasn't. Most of the people, they live there that no one knows.
We're talking about like what's going on right now and the Renaissance. What would you like to see happen in the future of Harlem? What would you like to see in Harlem?
Well, I talked about the process, the nominating committees, monthly town meetings where people can file their grievances. I'd like to have public hearings to identify community policy. Like, what is our policy on drugs? What is our policy on the relationship of hospitals to Harlem? Because you've got these hospital complexes that practically control the city now. You know, St. Luke's, NYU. Anywhere you see a big hospital, you see almost a big complex that has undue influence on the surrounding community. And I have a great concern about that. I don't think it's even healthy from a medical standpoint. Because the community is involved mainly as patients, not as in any kind of social medicine.
So do you see Harlem being what it was in its heyday? Do you think Harlem's going to come back?
Well, I would say they're never going to wipe out Harlem. That's our hidden agenda. You know? they can never do without Harlem. They couldn't survive the absence of a Harlem, even though they're trying to wipe it out, because they're trying to wipe it out economically and politically.
What about with the empowerment zone and everything?
The empowerment zone to me is a big game, okay? It's not serious. The people who run it don't have the experience or the guts to love us, care about us, okay? Don't even have the guts to be themselves. And that's why they were put there. If they were serious, they would have never taken a position to do what they're doing. Like we just came from Memphis, and you come with all the jazz musicians in Harlem, with all of the churches and money that we have in Harlem, they couldn't put together a group of people to run Menton's from a Harlem perspective. And by the way, it's going to make a tremendous difference, you know, because jazz is one of the art forms that there's been a great ease in introducing to the world. I mean, it's not been it's not been an art form that we've been jealous about, you know. It's something that we wanted to share. And there are many white jazz musicians who readily attribute their development to their exposure to black jazz musicians and so forth. So it's a vehicle for, you know, building a more humane society, which I don't think most of these.
When we've talked to the empowerment zone people about, what the hell is Robert De Niro doing coming in and getting this money, they say, well, he's actually just in the background, really. Mel Wilson's the one who's running the show, and that's what everyone's forgetting.
You see, let me say about the empowerment, most of the people on the board are people who were handpicked because they're not going to raise any questions, okay? Secondly, most of them have limited access to the community, to what the community is. Like, you know, to me, to say you know New York is to see New York wake up in the morning. If you've never been downtown 4 a.m. in the morning, 5 a.m. when it wakes up, or if you haven't been to Times Square on New Year's Day, if you haven't been to a Labor Day parade or Thanksgiving Day parade, or if you haven't been to, you know, the South Ferry or to the Empire State Building, you haven't been to New York. You haven't been to Yankee Stadium, Brooklyn, Dodgers. I mean, there's certain atmospheric, dynamic experiences you have to understand New York. For instance, to be at Times Square on 12 midnight on December 31st, and to be there with 1 million people and feel secure, and you don't know any of them. In fact, you're alone, but you're not alone. It's a rare experience. It can only happen in New York. But everywhere else, everybody would know everybody else. They'd have the security orders, my cousin, my uncle. Anyway, and so Harlem has some of that. You know, like going to the Apollo at the amateur hour and seeing performers of all ages, all races, get a fair shake and the voting, you know. If you got talent, it's praised, okay? And it's acknowledged. The thing of always being denied, not knowing for sure that you're going to get into the place, you know, going downtown, checking into a hotel, not knowing maybe you give the special Negro room next to the swimming pool, or whatnot, they'll tell you, you know, we don't have any rooms, you know, or you're looking for a house and you walk in and they say, well, oh, we just got a binder on that house, I'm sorry, it's not available, you know. Or you go to a nightclub and they keep coming to you to see if you're okay because they want to make sure you got enough money to pay your bill, and so they can track your money and get you out for the next show, you know. So we'll never feel what we used to feel at the Savoy Ballroom when you had 3 dance bands, continuous dancing, And by the way, there'd be whites there, you know, but there were whites there who were not looking at us like there was something wrong with us. They were glad to be with us. They were good. Yeah, that's right. And so, and that's, you know, that's probably one of the advantages that Harlem has that most communities don't have. Now, whites who come to Harlem want to come to Harlem, like the nightclubs, you know, like even the whole historic Cotton Club, where they only had white guests and black performers, you know. But a lot of whites came to Harlem. Smallest Paradise used to have a lot of white people.
What about today with the Audubon Bar and Grill here, where they do music?
What about the...
This is a club here that people come up for.
I didn't get...
Right here, this is a club, the Audubon Bar and Grill.
Oh, this is a new operation, you know. And I'm surprised that it's here. And even that, see, if I were involved in this, I would have made sure that the Audubon Bar and Grill was a legitimate Harlem institution, okay? That was a part of the informal network of Harlem, not owned by some outsider who's just trying to make money, you see? And I'm not against money. But, see, I continue to get back to the thing that the broader society doesn't respect the legitimacy of our existence. You know? And they see us as consumers, not producers. You see?
Can you see, Sammy, can you see him in it?
Because I just saw a card.
Could you look in one more time, just so I can get on through?
Yeah, look at the date, February 28th. Malcolm assassinated February 21st. But they probably made no connection, you know, between that. And that's what I'm talking about. You know? See, the word Audubon is inextricably intertwined with Malcolm and his history, you know. It's a sacred word, but not to most people. Yeah. Pardon?
Are you proud to be a Harlemite?
It's probably the second most proud. First, I'm proud to have been born to a black woman, my mother, Ida Mae Wilcox, okay? And to be a member of the black community. But I would say being a Harlemite is probably, it's a very emotional thing with me. When people talk about Harlem being wiped out, I mean, it's very disturbing to me, because they don't understand the emotionalism of their statement. You know? It's like a genocidal term. Yeah. And they just think you're talking about a physical planning, economics, impersonal thing, but Harlem is very personal. Very personal. One of the things I always comment about, when you're downtown, you never, if you're a black man, you never completely relax. Because some cops will walk up to you and ask you some ridiculous question. Or ask you for your identification. Or, and what are you doing here? But when you're in Harlem, there's a certain feeling of security. Like you're home. And but things are okay. Even though you don't have a lot, but there's something that's worthwhile. And you also are in touch with the fact that the revolution is not over. The revolution is still alive, bubbling, possible, not forgotten, on the minds of some and a lot of people, even though they may not do anything about it. But it's not a dead idea. It's not something that's been forgotten, put away. Like Malcolm is in the ground, but he's an icon. And they thought when they buried him, it would be all over. It was the birth of a whole new era. Not that we want him to come back, but we want to do something so that if he ever does come back, he'll be proud of what we did. Yeah. You know, so I thought about Harlem Hospital with the McDonald's in the lobby of Harlem Hospital, and Pans having served that community for years. Someone said the reason they didn't get the contract, they didn't submit a proposal. Why should they have to submit a proposal? They demonstrated they can run a business, you know, and so it's, and that's when you begin to know they have some other agenda. And the word is that some Dominicans run the McDonald's, and many of them can't even speak English. But we also know that Dominicans have money to grease people's pockets. And that may be one of the disadvantages of blacks, that they don't have the money to buy people, you know. And I think also a lot of us understand that you can't buy freedom. You got to take it, you know. And I think about all the money that was spent in Israel from 1948 to now, money, this country's money, and almost none of it contributed to the peace. They had to ultimately sit down with the Palestinians in order to get peace. So you can't buy freedom. You got to take it and earn it. Yeah. Very heavy. This is very heavy. Yeah. Every time I go into Columbia and to the medical apparatus, I wonder why Harlem Hospital doesn't have the same thing. And they tell me it's money. No, there's something else. There's an attitude. You know.
Okay, go now?
It's an attitude. Yeah. You know, what we can do is we can drive past that church, okay?
So have things changed much since you first came here?
Oh yeah, see, up this way you have, a lot of Dominican monies has come into Harlem. If you look at all the new school buildings and business, a lot of this has changed. And by the way, you know, like years ago, it was predominantly white, Jewish, you know, and like the modern day Harlem has extended because it's less white, you know.
What was it like when you first came to Harlem?
Say it again?
Do you remember when you first came to Harlem?
Yeah.
First you moved or whatever?
When I first came to Harlem, you really felt you were in you were really in a black community. So, you know. And see, don't forget, most of the black people who came to Harlem from somewhere else, came from communities that maybe were predominantly white, but they lived in a black community. Most of them didn't move into Harlem from integrated communities. And also, when they came to New York, Harlem was the only place where they were accepted. They didn't have a hard time finding let's see, make a left here. Make a left here. Sorry.
Sorry, Sammy?
To go over to Amsterdam now. We missed it up.
We what?
There was a place we could have cut off and made that run into Amsterdam Avenue. I missed it talking to you. For instance, like all of the nightclubs on 7th Avenue, Small's Paradise, the Big Apple Bar, people used to go from bar to bar, you know. Like you go out at night, you'd hit 3, 4 bars. Now they're all closed, you know. And many of them, by the way, were owned by whites, but they were the main clientele were blacks, because white people downtown wanted to come uptown and spend some time with black people. This is Amsterdam, right? Yeah. And some of the questions you're asking, I'd like to maybe get you with Helen Brown, Lou Myers, people who were here before me are part of it, you know. Because I lived in Brooklyn for a while. I guess it was really around the 60s that I became deeply embedded in the affairs of Harlem. You know? Now,
In the 60s, I mean, you think Harlem's better today than it was in the 60s?
say it again?
Do you think Harlem is better or worse than it was in the 60s?
Oh, physically off, it's much better. Better housing, more housing. The big thing is the control factor. That's what bugs me, you know. Like we don't have a way of doing something collectively around our youth. Now this is 40.
That's one way.
All right. See that sign there, Childs?
Is that the church you're talking about?
That's where, right there.
Oh.
That's where Malcolm was funeralized. That was the only church in Harlem that would allow him to have his funeral there. Not allow him, his family to. Because there was a threat that the church was going to be bombed, you know, because of the way in which he met his demise. And most of the churches didn't want to risk.
Roll it all the way down, the other way.
Didn't want to risk having a funeral there. But
What'd you say?
If you put the fan on slightly.
Let's see. Any place to park it? We like to photograph the front of the church, you know. Faith Memorial Temple, but Bishop Childs was the pastor in charge, and when he passed on, they changed the name to Childs Memorial Temple Church of God in Christ. And it would be interesting if you could get Bishop Quick, who now runs the church, to talk about his experience on that day on February 27, 1965, when they held a funeral for Malcolm here. Yeah. And I want to take you in a minute. Hey, brother. Brother, we want to get a picture of this plaque right here, okay? You mind? I know Bishop Childs.
Bishop Childs, no. Bishop Quick.
Hey, brother. My name is Wilcox. I've been associated, you know, with the church, with Bishop Childs, every year with the program on May 19th. And I just wanted to get a shot of that plaque.
Oh,
yes.
Okay.
Is Bishop Childs in? He's not
Bishop
here.
Quick?
I mean, Quick. I mean.
No, he said he's down.
By the way, did they ever get that picture, a big picture of Malcolm?
Where is he? He's in the classroom area? He's downstairs in the classroom area.
Oh, I can wait.
Okay.
Because I should have called and told him I was going to come by.
You can, okay.
Yeah. Do you know if they ever got a big picture of Malcolm? Somebody wanted to give him a picture of Malcolm.
I don't know. I'm not sure. I don't want to give you the wrong
Okay,
answer.
because I had arranged for somebody to pick it up. Anyway, this is the plaque right here. Back in see what year was it? In 1993, the church put together this plaque, Childs Memorial Temple, Church of God in Christ, the site of the Islamic funeral of El-Hajj Malik al-SHABAZZ Malcolm X on February, he was born May 19, 1925, died February 21st, 1965. But the funeral was held on Saturday, February 27, 1965. This was the only Harlem religious institution which offered to house this funeral. Yeah. Quick. I'm sorry, I should have called you, you know.
That's all right.
Yeah. By the way, did you ever get that that thing of Malcolm?
Yeah.
Oh, you got it? Oh, good.
Yeah,
Very good.
I
Very
don't know what
good.
we're going to do with it because I think it's kind of big.
Well, aren't you going to have a museum one of these days?
Yeah. That's the hope. We'll use
By the way, if you could ever get this guy to talk about the experience on that day of February 27th. By the way, these are students from Columbia University School of Journalism.
All right. Hello.
And I'm taking them around showing them Malcolm X tour sites. You know, we're up at Audubon, here. Then we're going to maybe pass the Unity Funeral Home. We saw the place on 16th Street. Then we're going down to the mural on, have you ever seen the mural down on West Street, 410 West Street?
No, I don't think I have.
Pathfinder mural has Malcolm and a lot of revolutionaries there. Yeah.
You've been down at 22 West already?
Yeah, 22 West, we were there yesterday. Well, we had a beautiful program on the 21st. I sent you a note about it.
Oh, yeah. I think I saw it on television. Was it televised? I saw something on television.
Well, Betty has one at
that's
Abyssinia,
right. Okay.
which is her own program. You know, she never even invites me. I don't even understand it. You know.
I don't either.
I mean, it's and the last time I saw her was at the program here last year.
Yeah.
And I spoke to her, and she just walked right past me.
Oh my, that's terrible.
Amazing.
So
So
one day we'll get it.
We saw Bishop Quick. We saw Bishop Quick. Yeah. Yeah. By the
That's
way,
my uncle.
that's your uncle?
Yeah.
Well, you know, you in relation to Griffin?
That's my aunt. My sister Griffin?
Yeah.
That's my aunt.
Okay. And what's her son's name?
Kevin?
Kevin.
That's my cousin.
That's your cousin. Because I worked a lot with Kevin.
Yeah.
And I know Kevin's mother.
Okay. You was coming looking for me? I was coming right back here.
No, I got to put it on.
Oh, all right.
Yeah.
That's your receipt. That's what okay. All right.
Living rooms to see 1 million black men standing in one place who were not drinking, cutting, cursing, talking about white people, and all the, you know, living up to all of the stereotypes that most whites have been taught about us. You know, it's not their fault, but that's what they, you know. And I also understand that, you know, in the white community, it's not that easy to be of independent thought. Costs your life. And you know, I think about my experiences with the SDS guys, Tom Kahn, Tom Hayden, Bill Kunstler, people of that ilk. What's his name? What's his? Oh wow. This guy died about 10 years ago. He was a hippie. He was the king of the hippies almost.
Abby Hoffman? Abby Hoffman?
Abby Hoffman. That's something. Believe it or not, the last time I saw Abby face to face was right up the street. We had a store that was organized in Mississippi, and this was going to become an outlet, and I helped them to hook up with a blank space and some people who were going to work with them. Well, you know, people like Abby Hoffman, who took great risks to work inside the black community, you know. And of course, you know, they probably didn't talk about it enough, but they took great risks. And it's interesting that you dug up his name, Abby Hoffman.
So where are we going to get you next?
And
Yeah, where should we go next? Should we go to the Audubon?
yeah, make a left here.
Sammy?
Yeah, and go over to Broadway. Okay, come down. And then, you know, what it also makes me think about is how little we appreciated in some public testimonial proclamation those whites who took the risks and who at the same time were affirming our own humanity in a very special way. I like when Bill Kunstler died, that was my first thought about how living in America as a black man was always a unique experience to meet a white person who respected the integrity of your own existence, you know, and didn't make a big thing about it. You know. Like there's two young girls, two ladies, they're my age, that I came up with in Ohio, Mary Brandozzi and Hilda Sfera. We went from kindergarten through the 12th grade together in high school. They're both Italian, but we were always close, whole 12 years of school. we started going to junior high school. I used to walk up to school. And then I remember when I graduated from high school, we had some wealthy whites and some whites who families worked in steel mills like my family did. And we wanted to make sure that some of the poorer people were represented on the school slate for officers. So I was elected treasurer, Mary was elected secretary, Fran DeTesco, who lived out in Brownsville, poor Italian community, was elected secretary, and Bill Ford to be elected as chairman. I mean, officer of a graduating class. At the time, I had no idea of the significance of it. And I just want to mention another thing. See, I was born in Youngstown, Ohio, at 736 Harlem Street, Harlem, with 1 block long. And on July 12, 1995, I was given the street sign, Harlem, where I was born and raised, largely because of the kind of role I played in this Harlem. You know, in fact, I've given my life to it. I'm part of the Harlem Council of Elders. I've been honored, acknowledged as a Harlem lover and things of that nature. And so I just find the connection that I was born on Harlem Street and that I've become such a figure in Harlem.
What is it about Harlem? And we're driving down these streets. What is it about this place?
What is it about it?
Yeah.
Well, Harlem is the best known black community in the world. As I've traveled around the country, around the world, whenever I introduce myself and they ask me where I'm from, I always say Harlem. I never say New York City. Most people from New York will say New York because New York has a certain symbolism in the world, like the biggest cities. I say Harlem, and the reaction I get is absolutely amazing. Because everywhere you go, people want to get to Harlem before they die. You know? They don't want to get to heaven without having been to Harlem. With all of the stuff they've heard about it, they want to see it. You know, they want to experience it. And I would say that's black and white people. You know, black people who've never been to Harlem, never lived in it, they almost have a little envy that they never lived here. You know.
Why do they have that envy?
Well, Harlem has a certain state of mind. That's what it is, the state of mind. About our legitimate claims as a people, you know. In other communities, people are outnumbered. They gotta try to survive with great odds against them, you know, and also with pressure to forget that they're black. You know, if people want you to become colorblind, which, by the way, is a white supremacist concept, you know, colorblindness. Even the term integration, the way it's practiced, is a white supremacist concept because it's not based on a mutual respect of ethnic groups and so forth. And that's one of the contributions that Harlem makes. Like it's the most welcoming community in the world. I've never seen a sign up set for blacks only, you know, or I've never seen any attitude that whites could not be a part of Harlem, you know. The main issue is the issue of control. Us thinking for ourselves, speaking for ourselves, governing ourselves, and making the effective decisions about our own infrastructure. And which reminds me, see, when something happens in Harlem, it begins to happen in other communities. As I said to you yesterday, many of the African American figures in history were touched by the Harlem experience. Langston Hughes, County Cullen, W.E. Du Bois, Adam Clayton Powell. Jackie Robinson lived here this first year. He played with the Dodgers. Willie Mays, Paul Robeson, Ella Baker, what's her name? Woman who was National Youth Administration during the Roosevelt. She was in the husband with the Army. In the Army with her husband. Used to have lunch with her at 22 West. Anna Arnold Hedgeman, yeah, that's right. People of that ilk, you know. And these are people who had a profound love for service of their own people. A lot of people who move out of Harlem are not trying to make it with us, they're trying to make it with somebody else. And many of them are hired to be used against the interests of black people. For instance, it's been my privilege to be on a lot of boards, interracial boards. And usually I found that people wanted not my mind or my mentality, my insights. They wanted me as a kind of a palace guard so they could say, we got black people on our board, you know. But they didn't want me to say anything, you know. But they would use my presence. You know. Or they, and the palace guard thing, I was once on a board that was protect the community rather than the people inside the community. That's one of our biggest problems, that the village aspects of our community no longer belongs to us. See, back in the days when we were all colored, before integration and so forth, the people who were in charge lived in the community. You saw them day in and day out, and you could watch them, you know. Now many of the people who are in charge live in Queens or upstate New York. Like they run the schools at 3 o'clock, they're gone. You never see them in the laundromat. You never see them at a local church. You never see them at a local funeral. And so they're not a part of the life of the community. And the life of the community is different after 3 o'clock and on weekends, or after 5 and on weekends. It's like really our community.
So what would you like to see happen?
Pardon?
What would you like to see happen in Harlem? Would you like to see...
Well, I'd like to see a people's movement that begins to hold its leaders accountable. In fact, I've developed a kind of a model for it, that all elected officials ought to come before a nominating convention to be nominated not by the party but by the people, based on a list of platform issues: reparations, community control of schools, anti-drug wars, you know, involvement in the decision-making around the infrastructure of black people, you know, because many of the decisions about the black family are not made by us, you know. So I object to the state control of adoption, foster care, because most of the foster care agencies are controlled not by us, but by other people. And like there's legislation now to grant, as we're coming to it now, there's legislation now to grant the right to whites to adopt black kids. And I'm not against whites adopting black kids, but it should not be based on legislation. It should be based on the will of the black family, okay? And the process should be controlled by us. Now, here it is right here. See right there? I'm sorry.
So when do you used to come to the Audubon, or?
See right there? That whole building.
Can I take it right here?
Yeah, you can make it right here.
Oh, it's one way.
I don't know. Yeah. Okay. You can make.
It's one way. I can't.
You can make it right here. Fire hydrant. Why don't you park right in front of the place over there? You know what this is, don't you? This is Columbia Medical School. You ever been up here?
Yeah, we went to the Audubon once.
Oh.
Sandy. We filmed, there was a band playing.
Well, whenever I see this building, I get emotional, you know? Because on February 21st, Sunday, about 4 o'clock, my man Malcolm was shot there. And see how close, go straight ahead. See how close the hospital is? They never got an ambulance over. They had to roll his body over to the hospital. And so we always felt that, oh, wait a minute, Dan. Can you, no, I'm sorry, make it right here. That's all right. No, something. It's over there. It's the one over there, I'm sorry. I don't know how that happened to me. I think it's because the building looks so much like it. You know? It's right there. Wow, isn't that something? You can make it right here. Yeah. Wherever you can park now, you can park. Maybe you can park straight ahead.
So how important is the Audubon?
Is it right here?
How important is the Audubon for Harlem?
Huh?
How important is the Audubon for you in Harlem?
Well, many people who come to New York and are interested in the Malcolm history events, they want to come to see the Audubon. You know? And before they renovated it, we had big murals on the outside, pictures of Malcolm and so forth, because we want to put a museum in there. And in the process of, trying to organize around the museum, the city brought in these medical experimenters. And some of us had proposed that it become a medical research center to study race and culture specific problems, like high blood pressure. And see, many of the health problems of blacks in America come from the fact that their ancestors came from a different climate. For instance, like sickle cell anemia, the sickle cell syndrome was an advantage in Africa. Mm-hmm. If you remember during the Vietnam War, they deliberately recruited African American males who had the sickle cell syndrome.
Why?
Because they could survive in a hot climate, easier with the syndrome, longer. Really? And so 18% of the people who died in Vietnam were black, even though only 12% of the population was black. Understand that?
Yeah.
Mm. And so one of my thoughts was to try to use this center, if it's going to, well, there's the other part of it. This building has a long history.
Yeah. I was thinking, we could talk about the Audubon, and maybe if you could, after you talk a little bit about the Audubon, talk about what you'd like to see for the future of Harlem.
Oh yeah, definitely. Because that's a part of the future. Yeah. Because most of them do not want to be themselves. They want to make sure they continue to get over with the white man. Yeah.
So Sammy, are we
and
okay.
So after I rode back to Harlem with Malcolm, mm-hmm. and the word got around among my black and white peers, I had no problems. Because, see, there's always the process in white society to check out is this guy still a nigger? Okay. Is he still? Can we still handle him? You know, can we still use him against his own people, or will he answer a ridiculous question about his own people? And when I was working in Mississippi, this woman who was working for a tooth dentist, she called him a tooth doctor, who was a dentist, but she was working for this tooth doctor. And every day I'd go to work, he'd ask me, what's going on in the civil rights movement? And she'd say, I'd have to think about why he asked me and what I'm going to tell him. So she said, when I got home at night, I was exhausted, you know, because every question he asked me had a double edge, you know. And that takes me back to Malcolm. Because when Malcolm was asked questions that day by the faculty at Columbia University School of Social Work, and people, when they heard he was going to be there, they came back from their vacations all over the country, all over the world. They wanted to meet Malcolm. And most of the questions were double-edged questions, you know, like, when's the last time you slapped your mother? Didn't say. So Malcolm would turn the question around and then answer the question. Every question they asked him, he'd have to take it, restate it, and then he'd answer the question, which they really had in their minds, which they were afraid to ask, or probably, you know, didn't believe that he would pick up on, you know. Yeah.
How long have you lived in Harlem? How long have you lived in Harlem for?
I've lived in Harlem physically since about 1967, 68. Before that I lived in Brooklyn, I lived in Queens, but I've always been associated with Harlem. I've been associated with Harlem since 1948, you know, working here, not as a resident. And I have a lot of feelings about the fact that a lot of people work here are not residents. Because as a resident, one of the things I want you to do is just to walk down the street with me someday. I don't think today's a good day because it's too chilly out there. But the people I run into, like kids I met 48 years ago, I met them as kids. They became firemen, they retired, and they're still here and I'm still here, you know. Or kids I worked with in the school were the grandchildren of people that I had in community centers. So, and you know, one of the things I'm struggling with now is how to how to educate people to understand that they're never going to change the context of Harlem. I mean, they're trying to, but there's a certain power in what has happened on this piece of turf with black people. You know, for instance, if you list any list of African American figures, you ask anybody in the country, name me 50 African American figures, the majority of them numerically or percentage-wise of the 50 will have been touched by the Harlem experience. They lived here, they worked here, or had an experience here that was key to whom they became. You know, like they met Langston Hughes, you know, or they were an athlete here, like taking sports. Many of the major athletes used to come to Harlem to play basketball. I have pictures of Dr. J playing up at 155th Street, and local guys playing against him, outscoring him, you know, but they went on drugs and he went into the majors. Like Carol Lieberman, who just got into the Hall of Fame, Basketball Hall of Fame. I read a story where she said that at age 14, she used to come to Harlem every Saturday against the will of her parents and play basketball with the guys, never had a problem, you know, and she ended up in the Hall of Fame. David Cowens with the Boston Celtics. The summer before he signed up with the Boston, before he actually went with them, he had signed up. Spent the whole summer here playing basketball. He ended up in the Hall of Fame also. And so there's a certain and I guess one of the things I'm sort of angry about is there's such a move to wipe Harlem out. Like I read a statement the other day by a gay guy who was saying that the Million Man March tried to invisibilize black gaze. I never heard that expression, invisible eyes, you know. But I think it has a certain kind of significance in what the powers that exist, powers that be, are trying to do to Harlem, to try to wipe it out as the Harlem that it is, and that it was, and that it became, and the contributions that it made. You know.
When you talk about wiping out and powers and everything, how does that relate to what's going on today with the empowerment zone? And
I think they're definitely related. In fact, I think those people were picked on that basis. So they would never pick a person like me, even though they know how much I've done in the community, how many proposals I've written. Like I wrote the first proposal for the massive economic neighborhood development and the anti-poverty program. And they used my model for the citywide model. They took it and just put, rather than East Harlem, I divide the community into 10 areas, so they divide the city. But they used my model as a way to relate to it. And by the way, my model was a self-empowering model. That is, when I work with groups, the first thing I teach them is how to control me. You know? Like when I supervise students, the first thing I teach them is how to prevent me from manipulating them. When I was at Columbia, I was training Peace Corps. And there were about 6 or 7 faculty who had groups of students that were training for the Peace Corps. And the Peace Corps students decided they wanted an overall student committee to hold the faculty accountable, which I agreed with. You know? And so each group was asked to select a representative to sit on the overall student committee. You know, my group refused to elect a representative. And they said, listen, we can trust you. We don't need to go behind your back. I mean, I'll never forget that, because I didn't anticipate that. I was urging them to elect someone. They said, no, we don't, because you tell us the truth. And what I remembered is that when I was teaching at Columbia, all the students, no matter who their advisor was, would come to see me to find out what was really going on. That's why I knew the SDS guys, I knew the SAS, that was the Students for African American Society, and I knew the student body group. They were always in and out of my office to find out the real deal.
Well, specifically, when you talk about people are trying to destroy Harlem, what do you mean?
That's a good question. Thanks for that question. First, see, black people in this country have never been, in my judgment, a credit for having peoplehood. They've tended to be seen as being off-white people. You know, like one of my criticisms of Malcolm's autobiography is that Alex Haley, if you follow the natural progression using the Horatio algebra model, he would ultimately have become a white man. and I would say that in my own experiences as a rather bright student, most of the white people I've run into have been trying to make me a white person.
So you think people are trying to make Harlem white?
Oh yes, definitely.
How?
Yeah. Well, first by control, you know. The major way is that if you compare Harlem with any other community, when anybody from the outside goes into another community, they check with the local leadership, you know. They wouldn't dare go into an Italian community without sitting down with the Italian leaders. They wouldn't dare go into a Catholic community without sitting down with the Catholic leaders, because they understand that if something's going to work, you got to have the consent of the people who live there. And see, Harlem's greatest strength is its veto power. It has the ability to destroy anything that it doesn't want or is not respected. Yeah.
Destroy through?
Yeah. And that dynamic is one of the negative dynamics, because people come in, don't respect the community, and the community instinctively begins to try to destroy whatever they're trying to do.
how does that relate? I'm sorry.
In which ways they don't respect the community?
What?
And you say that people come here and they don't respect the community.
Oh yeah, they come in with a package, trying to describe you without asking your opinion of what they describe. In fact, I'm probably the ultimate example of that. Because every time I'm sitting in a meeting, the first thing that comes to me is like deja vu. I was here 20 years ago. I was here when it started. But nobody ever asked me about what happened. Like Columbia got $800,000 to evaluate the Upper Manhattan Empowerment Zone. Now, I probably, as a social scientist, have studied Harlem more from the inside than anybody. You know, like it's in Columbia's, if you go up to Teachers College, you'll see it up there. But they didn't call on me. And the reason I think they didn't call on me is because I'm an independent thinker, and I have my own sociological interpretations. For instance, whenever I look at a study of someone coming in a place like Harlem, my main criteria is what relationships develops between the study person and the local people that it relates to. Do they end up with a familial, personal relationship, or is it still a professional-client relationship? And I always use this story to explain that. I was once called upon to go out to some place in Michigan to help the staff guy deal with his staff, because they were having all kinds of internal problems. So I walk into the staff meeting, and there's about 4 or 5 fine sisters sitting in the staff. So I said to the brother, man, have you ever tried to let these sisters know how pretty they are? He said, oh, no. And they said, what's wrong with us? And that was like the icebreaker, understand? Because he wasn't seeing them as total people.
Do you think then when things like the empowerment zone, people like Deborah Wright coming in and saying this is the way things are going, there's a problem there?
What do you think about that? What do you think about Deborah Wright coming in? Is there a problem?
Well, see, I've read Deborah Wright. I've been in the process of 3 letters that Deborah Wright wrote to a group that I'm a part of. One statement talked about demagogues. You know. Another statement implied that we were racist because we were concerned about people coming from the outside. Isn't that, they're going to call us racist because we want to defend ourselves. That was the same thing happened to us during the school community control movement. We're saying that our kids are failing, so we want a chance to educate our own kids. They start calling us racist because and by the way, before that time, before the school control community movement started, there was only 1 black principal in the whole city because they controlled the whole entry process. Like when I was at City College, black and Hispanic students, we were calling them Puerto Rican back in those days, could not pass the speech test at City College because, if you're a student teacher, you pass the speech test while you're in college. They couldn't pass it to the last year because people kept telling them you got a Georgia G or Alabama T, whatever it was. But it was part of the system. And so I was the guy who campaigned for black and Puerto Rican principals on the basis that these people ought to have greater sensitivity, but it didn't turn out to be that way.
How does that carry over to what's happening today? Or does it? Is there...
Well, I think in general, if there's any variable between the way black people are treated and other groups are treated in the society, the control issue is the main variable. Like when I wrote that paper on community control, I was taking a course down at the Urban Center on 42nd Street. My teacher was a guy by the name of Bob Dentler. He wrote a disclaimer at the same time my article was published. I mean, that's very unusual. Usually if you write an article, someone will read it after it's published and then write in. He put his disclaimer in along with my article on the same date it was published. What he was saying, I'm not associated with anything to do with black people controlling their own lives. And see, by the way, if you respect someone, your first measure of it is that you enable them, or you don't prevent them from being in charge of themselves, even with children. Understand that?
And so when you're talking about the empowerment zone, do you think there's a lack of respect?
Oh, definitely. I mean, that's why I didn't go to that meeting the other night. After I read the letters and to the community, obviously it was disrespect, and they assume they have all the answers, which is also a measurement, because no one has all the answers except the Creator, you know. And they also do not see them as themselves as our servants. They see themselves as our leaders. We didn't elect them. They were appointed through some political process that probably none of us would ever agree with. No. In fact, it so happens my name was suggested for the Empower Board. I knew I wouldn't get on it because I'm too independent thinker, and you know, you can't become a prophet in your own hometown, and that's, you know, like, for instance, I've been invited across the country to talk about community control. Harvard, Yale, Northwestern, you name it. Conferences, educators, and so forth. But almost never inside of Harlem have I been invited to talk about my understanding of education. Even though people know that I work in the school system, kids, the kind of opportunities I gave them, took them to Rikers Island, legislative conferences in Washington, FBI trips and so forth, you know, mainly through my contacts, you know, because I knew the people and so forth. And so, in fact, I've been trying to figure out that one in my life. I found myself talking yesterday about the failure of success.
You know, I'm sorry. Just sitting in this restaurant, it made me think of Copeland's, and you know, the day I met you, and we've been talking about the closing of Copeland's and what that means.
Yes.
You know, as it relates to the empowerment zone, and also when I was talking to you on the phone, it was really interesting what you had said about the proposal process and how that it's like back when banks would refuse giving loans to people. I mean, could you talk a little bit about sort of the Copeland's closing and what does that represent?
Well, see,
what do you think the Copeland's closing?
Well, see, Copeland's is a very important institution in the community in that he hired people that the average person probably would not hire unless they went back and did something else, you know. And so he was rehabilitating people, which is the kind of force we need in our community, because our kids can get arrested easier for doing nothing. I mean, they can be standing on a corner, end up downtown, and before you know it, the mother has to hire a lawyer to get them out, and they might get out, but that whole process is they paid a fantastic price. And when a black kid goes and he already has a record, I mean, because the fact he has black skin is like a record in this society. I mean,
how does community control play into what's happening in Harlem today? You said you haven't been given a chance to talk.
How does what?
The community control, or the lack thereof, play into what's happening right now. What are your fears? What do you think needs to happen in Harlem today?
Well, I just want to finish this question, and then I'll see. To me, Copeland's, he has a fantastic place up on 145th Street. You might try a meal there one of these days. And he was hiring people who normally would require some kind of rehabilitation. And those are special kinds of employers, you know. That is, they understand that part of the reason they hired you was to help you get your life together. So they have certain kind of sensitivities that the average employer does. You know, like, if a person like that came late, I would deal with him about his lateness, but not in terms of terminating. Like, what's your problem, and how can I help you with that problem? And how, you know, because that's I use it as a teaching experience, not as one to punish you. And a lot of employers would use it to get rid of you and get somebody else. And so he had 60 people working for him. And the other thing, you know, McDonald's could have helped him. I mean, McDonald's is $1 million corporation. So if the rent was $50,000 or $10,000, they could have found a way to sit down and solve the problem. And by the way, they would have solved the problem with a white institution, in my judgment. They would have sat down and said, listen, let's see what we can do. Let me help you. I mean, that's how communities survive. Even corporations have to help one another. You know? And that's the essence of a village concept, that people in the village get together and say, listen, how can we do something to keep the village going? Not just as one family, but this guy's contributing to the village. And as far as I'm concerned, McDonald's will never overcome this oversight. Now, it so happens that the people who have the local franchises feel they're not McDonald's, which they're not, but they could have gotten on the phone and called McDonald's, because they're benefiting from McDonald's. They're getting all this advertisement. And let's face it, most of us don't go for that food in the first place. You know? They got a McDonald's in Harlem Hospital. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine, in this day of age of health foods and so forth, they put a McDonald's inside of a Harlem Hospital? They would only do it in a black community or in a community they didn't respect. Okay.
What about
and so the symbolism of this is that I don't think McDonald's will ever live it down. I know in my lifetime I'm not going to live it down. I don't go into McDonald's in the first place. I don't like the food, but secondly, they don't hire local people. They bring people from White Plains, New Rochelle, and see, there's a reason why they don't hire local people. If they're hiring local people and they're doing something illegal in there, and I walk in there and I know the person, they're going to let me know about it because they know where I'm coming from. You know? Like if they're dealing drugs, I'm going to find out about it. Now, we once had a situation where it was a hospital on the east side. The guy in there's dealing drugs. So the junkies who were taking drugs to him came out and told us about it. We closed the place down just like that. And also, if they're paying people off the books, or if they don't have workers' compensation and so forth, if there's a local person, somewhere we're going to find out about it. And the other thing, local people will spend money locally. A lot of these people who work in the community, 3 o'clock, 5 o'clock, they're gone. They spend their money somewhere else. And they also have no kind of regard for the community. And they don't have regard for the community. They shouldn't be dealing with our kids, with anything about people. I mean, because all these things are connected. And so his question about control to me is very key, because the politicians, through the political parties, exercise a great deal of control. But it's personal control. It's not community control. It's in their own interests. It's not in the interest of the community.
And you don't think, you don't think that empowerment zone, what they're doing is in the best interest of the community?
I don't think they have the ability, the insights, or, just because someone designs it to be in, I have to know who's doing it, There's nothing about their behavior that suggests to me one, they care about the community. And to me, if the first person you got to be responsible to is yourself. That's the first person you got to be. That's what Malcolm always taught us. Be responsible to yourself. Know yourself. And if you really know yourself, you really have no need to manipulate another human being. If anything, you have a need to ensure that they're not manipulated. You teach them, like I said, my students at school social work, first person I teach them how not to manipulate them was me, because I had certain powers over them. I can give them a grade. I can flunk them out. So check me out first, okay? And any group I've ever worked with now, I walk into the community. First, I want you to know how you can control me. Because you teach them control, then they're going to pass that on. And we live in a society that's based on people learning how to take orders, willingly becoming suckers, willingly submitting to somebody else. In fact, with people not being in charge of themselves. Like, I got 4 kids, and one of them's up at Columbia now, Susan. She's in the Teachers College, getting a doctorate, and she runs that program, taking kids to Africa every year. Yeah. And I taught all my kids how to confront me and still love me.
Mr. Copeland's closing and other black-owned businesses, what do you think about this? Do you think there's going to be a problem with enough black businesses existing? Do you think?
Well, I think, number one, it's going to stimulate the community to do something about it in terms of developing black businesses, you know. And I think that'll probably be the most positive thing to come out, because we haven't done enough on our own to develop our own businesses. And I partly understand it, but there's no justification for it, because in your own community you got to have an economic system, you know, that you have a voice in, and I don't think that we have thought enough collectively about that issue so the empowerment zone will force that kind of thought, that kind of reaction. And at least, you know, that's my anticipation. Of course, the other thing, how can I say it? Adam Powell once said, "We never lost a riot." And we haven't, you know, even though people outside the community will say, well, you shouldn't riot and so forth. But if they don't give you any other alternative, that's the only thing people can do, you know. It's like in the schools now. I think a lot of parents have withdrawn from the schools because when they go in there, they get such a snow job that you'd have to, you know, admit that you have low self-esteem or you're some kind of dunce to go with it. So they just stay away from it, because otherwise they'll have to fight somebody, you know. Because, you know, I just found myself saying to a guy this morning on my way here, it's amazing how we've had to struggle and we don't appreciate the strength. And so I'm saying that there's a certain strength that comes out of the struggle that's going to benefit us and also benefit the society. Because, see, the society needs black people to stop being its doormat, you know, to stop being its victim. I mean, I feel that if the society is asking for anything, it's asking for black folks to take their place beside the family of man and to make the contribution that it can make, you know, like exemplified by Malcolm, Martin, Langston Hughes, Ida B. Wells, Marian Anderson, you name it, you know, people who made unique contributions not only to the black world but to the world in general.
Yeah, maybe now might be a good time to.
I just want to say one other thing. Since you're from Columbia, one of the institutions that I think has benefited mightily from the existence of Harlem is Columbia University. You know, in fact, I'm always amazed that how an institution like this hasn't done more to contribute to Harlem's control over itself. Like Harlem Hospital is a classic example. There was an article a couple months ago where doctors were getting paid double. They're getting paid at Harlem Hospital and also at Columbia. You know. So, or like the Audubon Research Center, they brought in 8 research firms from Israel to do study at 168th Street, by the way, which is a sort of a depressed area in terms of blacks and Hispanics. So they'll probably be able to go out in the street and pay some guy $10 to take this pill or be involved in this experiment, and we may end up with another Tuskegee experiment. So I'm trying to find out. In fact, I'm planning to write to Controller Havesi to find out how much money Columbia University, St. Luke's, Mount Sinai, and Beth Israel are making.
Sort of in its heyday.
Have you seen the movie back when we were all colored? Anyway, you might see it. But I was just telling someone last night, like Savoy Ballroom up 140th Street, they'd have 3 dance bands every time you went there. Continuous dancing. And these were bands like Count Basie, Chick Webb, Duke Ellington, Lionel Hampton. I mean, top musicians. And that was before most of these guys could play downtown and all this kind of stuff. And the truth of the matter is that we will never, as black people, ever enjoy ourselves the way that we did at at Savoy Ballroom or at Rennie's on 138th and 7th Avenue. That was a home of the New York Renaissance basketball team. They won the first 2 world championships in basketball. The New York Renaissance Ball Club. Every Sunday afternoon, they'd have a game, and I talked to people like 80 years of age who talk about, they used to tell their parents they were going to Abyssinia, which is next door, on Sunday, and they were actually going to Rennie's, you know. And so there was a certain amount of pleasure. For instance, like Rennie's was booked up all the time because local clubs would rent it for their affairs. So they didn't even have to go out and advertise. I mean, they made money just from the local groups and so forth. Now with integration, people going downtown, like take jazz for instance. You go downtown to a jazz nightclub. They let you sit for 1 show, or else you pay again, you know. And they start collecting your money just before the show ends to make sure they collect all the money. You got to pay a cover charge. And the jazz musicians, I don't care who they are, will tell you that there's a difference in playing in Harlem and playing downtown. Because the people, if you've been to the Apollo, when you go up with a high note, everybody knows if you reached it. If you didn't reach it, they start booing you, you know. Or you start singing a song, they know the song. Like I remember the Temptations were there about 10 years ago, and every time they start a song, they would put the mic out to the audience, because the audience knew every word. And like I remember at Count Basie's funeral at Abyssinia Baptist Church, I'm standing out in front, and I see all these junkies standing along. And every time a cab would drive up with a musician, mainly white musician, they would tell me exactly who the guy was, what instrument he played. I mean, it was amazing. And so I'm saying there was a certain access to information, certain opportunities for enjoyment and so forth, you know, and certain abilities to be in control of your own destiny. So when I go downtown, I never feel in control because anything could happen. And particularly if I'm over on the east side, Yorkville, you know, I could be picked up, stopped. Like I always tell this story. Once I went down to see a friend around 83rd Street. I'm walking down the street and this white woman's in front of me. She looks back and sees me and starts running. I go to the house where I'm going. I'm standing at the elevator. She comes to the door. She lives there. She sees me standing at the elevator and runs away. You know, I didn't follow her around. But that kind of thing happens, you know. Or cops begin to look at you differently just because you're a black man. And that's why a lot of blacks who live in the area almost unconsciously try to separate themselves from the blacks that come in casually. It's like the black students at I taught at Princeton one summer. The black students there could go into the white barbershops. No, I can't speak for all of them, but I sense deep suspicion of people like Giuliani, you know. Yeah. And see, the Giuliani position, in my view, is that black people should not make their own decisions. They should follow his orders. Mainly because he also needs their vote, because it's their vote that can probably keep him from being reelected. And I don't know of any example of him really being able to deal with effective black men. And the black community, if you can't deal with effective black men, then you're in trouble. because we are the major target, you know, of white society. You look at the prisons, the military, and it's the black man who's the target. And like when I said it, I thought about Lindsay. When Lindsay came to Harlem during the 60s, and he was in a riotous situation where people were tearing down stuff, so he walked right into the crowd. And people never forgot that, because most black people, particularly men, experience white people acting toward them as though they should fear them. And he walked right into the crowd. And nobody who was around at the time will. In fact, I think if anything, that's part will be his legacy. That he demonstrated that in his context, black people were human. And very few people, white people, have had that opportunity. You know.
That spirit you said you feel.
Yeah.
That spirit you said you feel walking down the street. Can you tell me something more about it? I mean, you were saying that yes, there's a renaissance, but it sounds like it's not just the words; it's something more permanent.
Well, I didn't.
You said it's not just the words that get right.
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
The spirit. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
I would say first, there's a religious thing going on in the community, and that more people are seeking God. Okay? And that's significant because people here have, a lot of them have experienced the handiwork of the devil, drugs, family breakups, and so forth. So they have a certain special appreciation of being touched by God's divinity, you know, and being saying that you're just as good as anybody else, you know, that you're a human being, and you don't have to live the way that you live. You don't have to take what you took. And so we have a layer of people who had that kind of experience. Like I used to go to a church where most of the members were ex-addicts, ex-inmates, or ex-alcoholics. And they'd all been through a certain kind of rehabilitative process that required their own investment. It wasn't somebody telling them what to do, but somebody, they'd have to find a way to invest themselves in it. And I enjoyed that church because people didn't go there trying to show off how much money they had, or they didn't have the attitude that this is my church. Nobody, because most churches do not have a sign-up members. They say members invited, you know. But they don't like really say sinners welcome, you know. Or a lot of churches are not involved beyond Sunday afternoon. And these people, they have to spend their day in and day out staying off drugs, staying off alcohol, staying out of trouble. Okay. So it is like a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week self-recovery, self-rehabilitation search. And so there's a lot of that going on. Secondly, the churches now are beginning to understand their economic power. They have a lot of economic power. For instance, the classic example is the Daddy Grace's church. I don't know if you ever heard of Daddy Grace. He was one of the guys like Father Divine, who organized a lot of people. His church is right across from my office. You know, where the, it's upstairs over, where Sekulu's, where the fire was, you know? Okay. And they've been able to use their resources to build housing projects without federal money, to, you know, the guy in my building was collecting rents from properties they own from Nova Scotia to Washington, D.C. And in fact, I was trying to help him to meet with other ministers about how to manage their money, but he sort of didn't feel they would be ready for it. But there is a move now of churches getting together on a collective basis, and around the issue of making their own monies work, and also doing it on a collective basis. And I think there's more interest now in institution building, building institutions that persist over, like this part of it. as an institution sitting here. We're trying to create a memory system around Malcolm X. So that every year we have some kind of commemoration. But not only that, every time I walk in here and I see people sitting here, I come over and I give them a little rap on why we put this here, that Malcolm sat there. And you can feel there's something special about sitting in Malcolm's seat, and even the artwork. So then we're doing the same thing at the church where he was funeralized, the funeral home where he was that handled his body, and other institutions of that nature. So the other thing is, in relation to your colleague's question, there's something indestructible about the march of black people toward full freedom and justice. Because everything in the world has been thrown at us. We're still alive. It's amazing. When I read about lynching and all this kind of stuff, and my work in the South and Mississippi, and all the kind of things that go on, and all of the double dealing. Like I remember we were looking for a house when I first got married. I'd walk into a real estate agency, and they'd see my faces, and I tell them I'm looking for a certain house. I say, "Oh, gee, we just got a binder on that house. I'm sorry, And so we start sitting in, and I'd go in with a white friend, and I'd let the white friend go on after me, and the white friend, they show them the house, things like that. And so I'm saying there's something indestructible about our struggle for full freedom and justice. But also, I sometimes believe that the Creator gave us a test that you're going to have to struggle. And in the process of struggling, you're going to have an impact on the society in the way that Martin did it, the way that Malcolm did it. Like if you look at the black inventions, many of the inventions of black people, they're made by blacks, meant people, were inventions to solve an immediate problem of blacks, but also to solve a larger society problem. Like cotton gin. We were doing all the work, right? So even though Eli Whitney got credit for it, it was a black slave who put together the idea and so forth. But what it did, it ended one means of oppressing black people. And there are other examples of that, the electric light.
You knew Malcolm.
And Malcolm sort of gave this society the idea that the black man and black woman were people in their own right. They had ideas of their own, and they had a desire to be in charge of themselves. See, Martin was talking about integration. And he was saying many of the same things, but he was heard by white people in different ways.
Did you know Martin Luther King well?
Not as well as I knew Martin. Malcolm.
What do you think if Malcolm X were living today and you knew him well, what do you think Malcolm would think about what's going on right now with the Renaissance?
Well, first, Malcolm was a very unusual human being in that he was never against people or against any other group. He would define them as he saw them. Now, people would, like, if he called you an Uncle Tom or white racist, he was saying that that's my opinion about what you are. I'm not against you. I'm not saying you don't have the ability not to change. And a lot of people never heard him in that context. Understand that? That's why I'm prefacing mine. And so I think he would be, he would make an objective analysis of what he saw, and then he would try to get people to look at what they were doing. Because see, Malcolm wasn't one who was giving you answers. He'd say, what's your opinion? What do you think? He was really invested in you becoming in charge of yourself and making your own contribution. And so, pardon me, and see, I think when he left here, he was still trying to convince us that he was not our Messiah. And I think if he had a failure, it was that he was never able to get us to be in charge of ourselves. And so I think if he came back, those are the kind of questions he would ask. He would ask the politicians, are you serving your people or are you serving yourself? In fact, if he could not, his questions would probably shake up the world. Because the other thing,
Did Sammy, good. I guess we should probably maybe, we were thinking we could, walk outside, we got a car, so we can
did you get a picture of the window? Malcolm? This building, 55 West, at one time was the tallest building in Harlem up until the time they built the state office building. And the guy who was managing the building got involved with the mafia, and they took his car, so forth, because he owed them money. And that, the state office building is the tallest building in Harlem. It's a monument to Rockefeller. He built it as his sort of epitaph of Harlem. And the young militants sat out there for months trying to prevent the building, straight ahead building from being built.
For Minton's?
Well, you can make it left, go ahead. Because their position was that they didn't care what kind of building was there, but community should decide what the building was going to be, and not Rockefeller and his henchmen in Harlem. And they ended up losing because they got arrested on the last day, so forth. This is 7th Avenue. Well, this is Lenox Avenue. Yeah, Lenox Avenue.
What does Lenox Avenue represent for you?
Yeah.
What do you
The
think?
landmark for the 7th Avenue was Teresa Hotel, where Castro met with Malcolm, where Charlie Rango used to be a bellhop, where Ron Brown's father was the manager. Marcus Garvey met there. Want to go to 118th. By the way, you know, one of the things you might, since you're on Lenox Avenue, go straight to 116th, and you'll see the mosque where Malcolm, that was the one the Muslims used when Malcolm was alive. And then I don't know what they call that bulb, that big round thing, what do they call it, on top? That was blown up a couple days after Malcolm was assassinated, like the 23rd of February.
So has this changed much since you...
Oh, yeah.
One-way street?
Oh my God.
Where's the light here? I don't see it.
Is that one way?
Yeah, it's one way though. People don't seem to talk about this area of Harlem too much these days.
Yeah. What was it like back, like 20 years ago or 30 years ago? Do you remember?
Oh yeah, well, this is a lot of this. See, this is housing and thing fixed up. I should be right in here. Oh yeah. All right. Okay. Wow, isn't that something? See, when Minton's was active, it was back during the bebop days, you know. Charlie Parker, Dizzy Gillespie, Babs Gonzalez, Bud Powell, Miles Davis. They used to be on 52nd Street every night. In fact, college students used to go down on 52nd Street at night and just stand in the street because they couldn't afford to go into the clubs and listen to the jazz outside. And these guys would come out and they'd talk to them and so forth. And then after they played in these places around the city, they would come to Minton's and just hang out all night working on their skills, their arts and so forth. You know? And I really doubt if that kind of enthusiasm is going to return with jazz unless something that's a renaissance, which I feel slightly, but I'm not sure. For instance, Wynton Marsalis, I don't know if he's ever even been to Harlem. He probably has, but he has not in any way connected jazz as an art form to Harlem in a way in which it's connecting the minds of most people. Harlem and jazz are like, same word.
Maybe could
and then, I don't know, it might work, but
Do you want to go outside?
I'm not sure.
Preston, do you want to
Should we just step outside?
step outside and stand?
Maybe Sally can. You should stay and watch the birds at the meter.
Yeah.
Fire hydrant.
We're going to go outside just to go.
Yeah.
mic, if you could just say, sort of, talk about Minton's, and then after talking about Minton's for like a little bit, just say what does Harlem...
On a Minton's Playhouse, months after it was announced that Bobby De Niro got $150,000 to reopen it. And sure, we know about Melba from Sylvia's, but it's a very strange kind of feeling to be standing in Harlem, which is deeply associated with jazz, and to have our so-called government reach outside of Harlem to involve someone else in the investment, rather than using the same structure and opportunity to pull together a jazz institution in Harlem, which many of them already exist, and give them the responsibility of resurrecting their own culture, their own community. And so as I talk about it, it sounds like a very disrespectful act. I can't imagine that the government would go into the Italian community and open up black-owned Italian restaurants, pizza restaurants. So to me, it's an insult, powerful insult. But on the other side of it, the fact that I'm standing here on this morning, on March 2nd, 1997, says that all is not lost, because I'm not standing here alone. I'm expressing the views of a lot of people, even those who don't even know about it. Because our view is not only connected to jazz, it's connected to our struggle for a place in the sun like all other groups, on our terms.
Okay, Brother Preston, could you give us your feelings on this place that used to be called the Audubon Ballroom? What does it make you feel when you look at this place today?
I feel that it's Malcolm's tomb, that he died for us, and nobody has died since then. And most of us have not even acted as though we missed him or have any appreciation for what he did for us. And this building probably hadn't been for some protest by black people, they probably would have ignored the fact that he even lived. You know? And they still, even with the new redesign, are not giving him credit for putting this place on the international map. This building would not have been known, even though Columbia University bought it, had not Malcolm died on this spot 32 years ago, on a Sunday afternoon, about 3 o'clock. And that's up to 5:30 now, 2.5 hours ago, 32 years ago. And
do you feel that what they did to the building, supposedly to commemorate its significance, is adequate?
Oh no, to me they were trying to wipe out his memory. I mean, they were doing everything they could to make sure that we forget about Malcolm. Like, that's why they killed him. And I feel the FBI, CIA, the government were involved in the execution of Malcolm. They were trying to wipe out his memory and to teach us no more Malcolm X's. And what happened reversed. He's become an icon because they killed him. Because he died so honorably, walking out on that stage by himself without security guards, saying, like, in a sense, I'm here. I'm going to stand for what I believe in. You got to take my life. I'm willing to pay that price. And that's a message that a lot of us have not learned, that you got to pay a price if you want to be free. And to a large degree, they got over because there are more brothers now who are unwilling to die since Malcolm died. Sad.
Can you
To me? See that, Mike? This is focus for you.
Tell us about it.
Yeah, I used to come up here and park my car in front of the Audubon Ballroom, and I used to just try to absorb the feeling and the vibrations of what happened to Malcolm, you know. And at that time, I was trying to construct a scale model of the Audubon Ballroom, and I was trying to get as much as I could to help me do the model. So that's why I used to come up here, you know, before they redesigned it.
You know, of all the people I've run into, you seem to have had more of a genuine lifetime interest in Malcolm X. As a human being, as a
Switch it over, since he's asking the question.
As an exponent of our
hold the mic, since you take his
our freedom urges and so forth. How do you think that happened?
I didn't hear the question, I'm sorry.
How do you think it happened that you became such a devotee of Malcolm X, lifelong? Most people have short-term, you know.
Well, I would say that a brother like Malcolm has to be remembered long-term. The giving of his life was a long-term commitment. And for that alone, we have to fight for Malcolm. We have to, you know, not make it a temporary thing, but a full-time thing, as opposed to part-time.
But do you think that we were listening to Malcolm, all the stuff he was trying to teach us?
As a people?
Yeah.
No. I think his message, for the most part, fell on deaf ears. Because look at the condition we're in. You know, we've gotten worse, I feel.
Yeah.
We've gotten worse as a people. That's how I feel.
Yeah.
We haven't listened to his message.
Why do you think we couldn't listen to him?
Maybe it was some of the things Malcolm tried to wake us up to were too hard for us at that time, and are still hard now. Because it seems like we enjoy what society has given us, and it hasn't given us anything. And we're content and happy with nothing. And if you're content and happy with nothing, you'll never fight and try to attain anything else. And that's what I think our problem is. We don't have goals that we try to obtain and reach. And I think that's a serious problem with us.
Well, do you think he always claimed that if you want to organize, you have to wake people up first? And do you think many of our organizers try to wake people up first, or they try to get them to follow their agenda?
I think most organizers and leaders, if you want to call them that, don't have the interests of the people at heart. I think, you know, they're trying to achieve and obtain status and wealth for themselves. They're not for the masses.
Yeah.
I really believe that.
I hear you.
You know, this brother Malcolm, his loss was irreplaceable. You know, we haven't found anyone since to replace his footsteps or fill his shoes.
See, I think a lot of us have some Malcolm in us, but we haven't found a way to get it out of us. I think education has been misused to educate people away from Malcolm. Because I think if they understand him, they're doing something, all they're doing is understanding him. So what do you think we can do about that?
Education is a good thing, but we shouldn't get education to go support the oppressive system that's oppressing us. We should get education to go for self.
Yeah.
You know, not to go support the enemy or those who are against us. Get an education to build your own empire.
Yes.
In that respect, I'm for education. But I don't believe in hiding behind education, because I run into a lot of brothers, they talk about, you know, yeah, man, I'm into books, man. I read this and read that. If that's nullifying your response to fighting against an oppressive system, all the book reading in the world is not doing anything for you, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, it's good to study, but sometimes it's necessary to study war also.
That's right. See, one of the things you're putting your finger on is the skill of the system of turning people against their own interests and getting them to follow the interests of the oppressor.
Yeah.
So many of us celebrate our oppression. When you see a brother driving down with a pink Cadillac, he's usually celebrating his oppression.
That's right, I agree with you.
Or driving with a Mercedes-Benz.
That's right, that's right.
He's not aware of that.
That's right. That's what he's doing.
But the man is glad to see him driving that because he's no more.
He's no more of a threat.
No more of a
threat to society.
It's all over.
It's all over.
That's
he's
right.
content. He's happy. He's content in achieving all this material wealth, and to him, that's what he's waged a war to obtain. Material wealth. You know, that was his struggle, to get a big 35-inch television set, a Mercedes, and this and that. That's not struggle.
And spend the rest of his life trying to keep it clean, keep people from bending the fender and everything.
Having to fit over that.
And so in a sense, people get trapped in their own oppression.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's
celebrate.
Right. Become materialists.
Yeah.
And I think capitalism and the American society promotes you to be a materialist.
Yeah.
They promote you to be an individual.
Yeah.
You know, they promote it every day. You know, I saw the beginning of that attitude being fostered or forced on us when they were coming out with these chains with the insignia on them, saying I'm #1 and, you know, that type of stuff.
Yeah.
It brought about an individualistic mindset.
Yeah.
Everyone has adopted it, you know? It's sad, man.
Yeah.
It's pitiful.
Let me ask you, you know, a lot of our historians never talk about race, the race war. They talk about racism, but they don't talk about it's a war, you know, a protracted war between us and them. Also, many of them do not, they talk as though the white man is so powerful, there's nothing we can do to get him off our backs. And they make a lot of money doing it, by the way.
They sure do.
Yeah.
They sure do.
And I've always felt that they have been used by the system to empower the man. My belief is that we were enslaved, but we never became slaves.
That's deep, and I understand that. I understand that.
But they keep talking about we're still slaves.
No.
And they're helping to make slaves.
That's right, that's right. But
so,
I don't view the white man as an unconquerable force.
Good.
I never see him as an unconquerable divinity. You know,
right on, brother.
I don't believe, I hear a lot of brothers say, you know, we can't win if we were to wage war against him. His military might is too vast, it's too superior. I don't believe that.
That's right.
And you know, a lot of brothers, especially a lot of religious brothers, will tell you that we have to leave it up in the hands of God. Only God can come deal with him. Meanwhile, we have to stay here and take this crap, which I think is ridiculous.
Yeah.
You know, even on the way here to the Autobahn, we were coming down the West Side Highway, and we saw a big, huge battleship that was on display.
Yeah.
I believe that battleship that's on display, I don't even know the name of the battleship, but it got a lot of military apparatus on it. You know, that is designed, it's propaganda designed to put fear into people's hearts.
That's right.
To let them they're constantly reminding you of their might and their power.
That's right.
For you to never challenge them.
Yeah.
But that doesn't work on me. I think they are conquerable. I think they can be defeated, and I think they can be beat. And that's the only way change is going to come about, is for this current oppressive society to hand over, they're not going to hand over their reins, but it has to be taken from them.
Yeah. You know, you just reminded me, so I fought in a segregated army in World War II. And I'm ashamed of myself, you know.
Why?
That I went and fought in a segregated army.
Oh, I see.
and where they would not treat me as an equal.
I see.
And you know, even though I came out and I got some of the benefits, we legitimated the segregated army. I see it. And maybe that's something we ought to appeal on a national basis. You know?
I see.
Because until we're willing to fight for some of the wrongs they've imposed upon us, we're participating in our own death.
Destruction. I hear that.
That's right.
Financing our own demise.
That's right.
I hear you, brother.
And this country is very skillful at that.
Very skillful.
Yeah.
Very skillful. Because we're not even aware of the perpetration that they're putting on us. You know, apparently we're in a daze to this. You know,
Let me just say, it's an honor for me to be able to talk to you in front of the Audubon.
Well, thank you, brother.
It's always an emotional experience for me to come here, because this brother, Malcolm, I consider him, by the way, the major black man I ever met in my life.
Hey, brother,
This is not putting down Martin or anybody else. I felt this brother didn't live for himself alone. He lived for all of us.
That's right. He was selfless.
That's right.
Without a doubt.
And he was interested in self-knowledge.
That's right.
He was interested in sharing positive issues with us and so forth. He wasn't interested in us following him.
No.
Most of our leaders wanted to follow
That's
us.
right.
He wanted you to follow your own conscience.
That was Malcolm.
And there was a great lesson from him.
Great lesson.
If we ever learn it, we'll take over the world.
If we ever learn it. If we ever really sit and listen.
Very simple
to
lesson.
what he was saying.
I mean, he never followed anybody who didn't respect.
That's right.
We follow a lot of people who don't respect.
And though the brother is no longer with us, he's left records and tapes for everyone to listen to. So I suggest that is a start for everyone to start listening to his message that's on records and tapes and even CDs now.
That's right.
And listen to this great revolutionary, this brother that we love and
that's one of the tasks you and I are engaged in, trying to find a way to leave this brother's message here so it's accessible to people, not only in books, but by CD-ROMs, TV, classrooms, you know, because I think of him as a curriculum. Like you follow his life and learn from it.
That's right.
You got to be better off.
You got to be better
off. In fact, so the brothers who follow him are not better off than they haven't followed him. The brothers who studied him, who are not better human beings, they were BSing themselves.
That's right. They weren't really listening.
That's right.
That's right.
They
didn't put the arm on the record.
That's right.
Or they didn't press the play button on the CD. They missed it.
That's right.
They missed it, man.
All right. Okay,
All
thanks
right.
a lot, brother.
Thank you, brother. Peace. Perfect. Okay, that's it. The shots before. Awesome. One more and then that's it.
Serious.
Thank me for calling him brother.
Uh-huh.
Because I always address people as brother. But he knows he's white.
Uh-huh.
Right. In fact, yeah, when I look at these walls, it's significant because you are white. Because most people, even so-called radical blacks, do not have this kind of stuff on the wall.
I understand what you're saying. Sure. I understand what you're saying. Sure.
And that's significant. If I were to walk into a black guy's house with this kind of stuff, I probably wouldn't say a word.
Notice. Yeah. Well, all right. Okay, let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
Is it also important that I'm Hungarian, right?
Yeah.
Hungarian, East European, European.
No,
it's also
the
important,
fact that
no?
Hungarian didn't even cross my mind. I'm saying the people, see, I was looking at a camera, people looking at you who don't even know you. I know how black people respond to a white person around certain issues. I've been in the black community. So I know how they respond. They'll tell me things they'll never tell you.
Of course.
I mean, like, for instance, most black women I know are down on interracial marriages.
I know that.
They may never say it to you.
I know that. I know that. They don't have to tell me.
Wait a minute, listen, I'm saying, but most of them are down on interracial marriages. And many of them never say it publicly. So.
Well, I can tell you about why, if you're curious to hear why I am doing African figures or black figures. You would like to know?
Huh?
You would like to know why I do these figures?
Yeah, people would like to know. The public, anyone would be curious why a white person chose to do figures on black people. They would like to know. It's like if I got into rock music, black people would wonder why I got into rock music. It's legitimate.
Okay, no problem. That's very easy for me to answer. Okay, let's go back to Hungary.
Like the other night when I was sitting beside you, people came over and said, listen, I saw you sitting beside that white woman, but I know you're not in a white woman, so I'm not worried.
Yeah, I understand what
you didn't know that.
No.
You didn't know people came and said that to me. And you're saying, I was sitting beside a person who was not white? I'd say 4 or 5 people came, man, I saw you sitting beside that white woman.
You couldn't say she's not white.
Yeah.
It would look like you're in denial now.
Okay. All right.
You're in denial.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's right. That's deep.
I had no feelings about sitting beside you.
That's right.
She did not say.
But you don't let me speak at all. What about those black people?
Her skin color's not white. She did not say.
I'm talking about my mind, the mind, not the skin color. I'm not blind, of course.
No, she says she's not white, brother.
In my mind, I'm not white. I'm not talking about my skin.
She said, I'm Hungarian, I'm not white. Play back the tape then. Play back the tape. Play it back.
I don't consider.
That's all at the beginning.
Play it back. No, that's very important.
I said that. I said that.
Interesting tape.
See, we're talking about,
I said that. I know I said that. I don't want to change it.
One of these days, we're going to change the world to make it a human world. In my belief, in the human world, people will respect ethnic and cultural differences. Like they respect sexual differences now.
Yeah.
Sex.
That's right.
Gender
That's right.
and so forth. One of these days, it'll be okay to be Greek, black, and so forth, as against everybody becoming colorblind.
No, I don't. No,
another
no.
thing for white supremacy.
I don't like colorblind at all. I don't consider myself colorblind.
See, for most white, in this type
I'm not
of economic, racial, climate, political, social, economics, that's all been colored by white supremacy. Basically, a black person and a white person can't sit down and have a real conversation. With this person believing that they're superior as white and that you're inferior as black. A real conversation can't take place. And what happens most of the time is the black person will feel obligated to defer to that white person, their superiority, and never really tell them how they truly feel. But being from your political statement that you have chosen to make, that you will not associate yourself with that white
supremacy.
Supremacy, that belief in your superior.
That's right. I know I have light skin. I'm not blind.
I feel that I can speak to you. I feel that there's worth in speaking to you, that we can change this thing, you know, and get away from this whole, you know, this whole thing. But somebody else that has not chosen to make a statement, basically, I would have nothing to say.
I understand.
I would have nothing to say.
Remember when?
Let me say something.
I thank God for Malcolm coming along.
Yeah. Let me say something.
Because look how light I am. But in my mind, I'm black.
That's what I wanted to say.
I'm black, man. You can't take that from me.
When Tiger,
Malcolm helped me in that regard.
when Tiger Woods said he was Calabasian or something,
Oh, he's a
he was, what kind of stuff is this, man?
Well, he
When
somewhere.
a guy makes it and says, like, what's his name, Coleman? They asked him, Vince Coleman. He said, what do you think of Jackie Robinson? He said, I don't know nothing about no Jackie Robinson. Jackie Robinson made it possible to be there, man.
I hear that. How you gonna deny it?
We allow all types of things to get in front of us, really being able to sit down and talk as human beings. Like just a minute ago, y'all was gonna make me take my hat off.
I guess the thing I'm concerned about is that this man's humanity become public knowledge.
That's right, brother.
And that he was not one of these media leaders or someone who was living for himself alone.
That's right. It was selflessness.
Indeed, he died because of his love for us,
I hear you, Professor.
and not solely because of his love for self-glory. Listen out, talk about.
Come in, brother.
Get to the pearly gate, and that black angel gonna say, "Hey, brother,
Welcome.
how you doing, man?"
That's right.
You're gonna say, "Man, would the black women say you should get in here?" I said, "Check with them, man." He said, "Come on in, brother. Your name's not on the list." Then he said, "And you knew Malcolm?" "Yeah, man. Hey, sit down, let's talk for it, man."
I feel the same
That
way.
brother came through here some years ago, man. This place, heaven had not been the same.
Yeah. That tells me a lot about your love for the brother. That says a lot. But I feel the same way. That ran across my mind before, you know.
Yeah.
That might get me in. My love for the brother Malcolm. They said, "Oh man, come on in."
So I find myself on the February 21st every year, almost wanting to send a card to Betty. In fact, one year I did, and you know.
Like I'm not even here. Okay, we would like to thank you for your time, of course, for allowing us to do this project. We appreciate that highly because we know your time is valuable, but we also appreciate that you understand the value of what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
Because Malcolm has not, in our opinion, been done the justice. There are too many details surrounding his life, his struggle, and his assassination that are missing. And our whole purpose of doing this project is to produce a documentary for future revolutionary, future people who want to walk in the path of a Malcolm X, to not repeat the same mistakes that were made, to see the type of opposition that, you know, anyone that undertakes this mission is going to meet, so that we can get a better grip of it and be more successful in the future. Did you ever meet Malcolm?
Oh yes, yes.
When did you first meet Malcolm and under what circumstances?
All right. First, I want to thank both of you for making this opportunity possible, because I feel that an understanding of Malcolm's humanity is very important. I think a lot of the people who wrote about him probably could not have dealt with him if they met him face to face while he was alive, or many of them, since they were scholars, probably would not want white America to know they even knew of Malcolm. I remember all of the people I knew who could not even say his name properly, like they would slur Malcolm or something to make sure people didn't understand clearly that they were saying Malcolm X, you know. And I also want to say that Malcolm operated in Harlem, and my life's work is intimately associated with Harlem. And, you know, for lack of a better term, among the grassroots. That is, I know people from every walk of life. I've employed people from Harlem in my organization. I've been involved in funerals where there were 10 people there, where we had to make a collection in order to pay for the funeral. I've been in courtrooms with people without legal defense, you know, as occurs a lot with our people. And I've been in touch with people in our community who are looking for those who have made it, or are articulate, or who are educated, to provide some leadership of an ethnic basis, you know, so that when they stand up, they're not only talking about themselves, they're talking about us in a way which reflects their respect and love for us, you know. And so, long before I met Malcolm face to face, my staff used to take some of my writings, because I've been circulating stuff for the last 30, 40 years, and share it with various members of the Muslims and so forth. And I learned years later the stuff was getting to Malcolm commenting on it and so forth. And see, Malcolm was of the people. As we showed earlier, you know, we saw pictures of him in homes with parents, sitting with the politicians at a speech somewhere. And I have many stories of people who knew him almost as a neighbor, you know. Like one of my friends talks about how he'd be sitting on the stoops every day and Malcolm would walk past, talk with him, exchange niceties of the day, what you're doing, this and that. Finally he asked, "Mr., what's your name?" "Oh, so my name is Malcolm X." And I have another set of stories where people would see Malcolm regularly, and eventually he would say, "Oh, hi Judge, how you doing?" He'd found out the person's first name. He had a way of, that was important to him, that he personalized his associations, that he got to know you. Another thing is, when I think about it now, I once sent him some information about some ideas I had, and I think the only reason I sent it to him is because I felt that even if he disagreed with it, he would react to it and respect it. My right to think for myself, you know. And that's probably one of his greatest traits that we don't have available now, you know. Like, in my judgment, in our community now, when people disagree with you, they don't even want to speak to you. You may even have to throw down. And Malcolm was not one of those people with whom you had to disagree, to agree, and he did not dislike you just because he disagreed with you. Okay, and so, and I'm trying to think of all the things that have shaped my respect for the brother. I know I was never anti-Muslim, even though many of the people who now follow him, in my judgment, were anti-Muslim, and they joined him after he left the Muslims, as though he cleansed his Muslim experience out of him, which is impossible. Also, I think, I don't believe he was ever anti-white. And I'll explain that further later. But some people who joined him, in my opinion, joined him because they thought he was no longer anti-white. You understand that? Even though, you know, when he went to Mecca and came back to talk about the change in relationship, to me, he was not saying he was anti-white before. He was saying he met a different kind of white person within the Muslim world that he met in the American world. And There's no question about that. But and the point I'm trying to make here is that I was not against him before he was suspended by the Honorable Elijah from the Nation of Islam. And the reason that to me is important is because, believe it or not, I met him face to face. It was like May or June 1963 at Columbia University. He came over to speak with a group of students on, sort of me was like a false issue on human relations. And a colleague of mine, Professor Hackshaw, was running this special community relations workshop during the summer. And so he invited Malcolm as one of the guest speakers. And when everybody found that Malcolm was going to be there, faculty came back from all over the world from their vacations. That's what it was during the summer, that's right, so it couldn't have been in May, to be there when Malcolm was there. And I think they probably anticipated this guy was anti-white, anti-Semitic, but in truth, I think they respected that he was saying something to black people which they were not saying to black people. Because see, what Malcolm was saying to us, anybody who respected our humanity would say to us, you know. Like if I would say to my daughter, defend yourself against rape, I would say this to any woman if I'm against rape. You know. Now, if I'm only for rape of black women, okay, isn't it? And I think a lot of other people do not understand that aspect of Malcolm's humanity, that he wasn't only against his own oppression, he was against all oppression, no matter who was being oppressed, you know. So the brother didn't die for himself, he died for all of us. The thing I remember about that meeting, that there were a lot of white liberals on the faculty at that time. You know, white liberals have a way of asking you a double question, you know, asking you a question, trying to teach you something, you know, or making a statement that they really should be asking you a question. And Malcolm was a consummate expert in turning your foray around into what it should be, you know. Like if the question was crooked, he'd straighten it out, you know. He was tremendous. And he had this rapid fire response because, see, he had prepared himself, self-educated himself in a way that most of us were not educated. So he had a chance in prison to pick out what he wanted for his own curriculum. When you go to school, they give you a list of books you got to read, to answer, and so forth. And half of it you don't want to do, but you do it just to get out of school. But he read everything. And he read things by racists, you know, by humanists, by all kinds of leaders and so forth, because he was trying to develop his own mind so he could be in charge of himself. You know? And I think, you know, if anything, he was an individual who was in charge of himself.
Stop, brothers. You get a lot of microphone noise. We gotta hide it.
Before we did the pause, after my.
You know, you ready? Let's get it.
Now, I was still talking about meeting Malcolm, right?
You want to go back to that?
No,
go on, brother. Do what you want to do.
All right.
We got tape. We got enough tape.
Yeah. Okay. In fact, I was going to say that even though that was my first face-to-face encounter with him, I'm not particularly interested in highlighting that as the event. The event was seeing Malcolm in the presence of a cross-section of people, responding to questions and assessing, in my own viewpoint, that this man was not anti-anybody, that he was a great human being, had a crystal clear perception of what he wanted to become, what he wanted to do with his life. He was sharp, analytically and intellectually, And to me, his performance as a human being is what floored people, you know, what amazed people, what left them standing there like it's unbelievable, you know, particularly with all the media hype about him, you know, because the assumption at that time in most newspapers that Malcolm was violent, he was anti-white, whatever, anything else that would make white people uncomfortable, you know. And then I think there was also an assumption he enjoyed making white people uncomfortable. And I'm sure that he did, but that was not his purpose. Because, you know, we have brothers in the community whose whole thing is just to keep white people up against the wall so they can get a payoff, you know, and get paid not to do it, you know. It's you know, it's a way to get yourself promoted. See, and so I've always felt that the Urban League used that, you know. The Urban League is like they benefit from the Mau Mau attacks of the black community, and here they come along as the missionaries, you know. And you say, all right, we'll give you some money to make sure you don't become Mau Maus, and we also want you to oppose the Mau Maus, you know. Right. And they, you know, inappropriately speak for us without speaking to us, you know. And so Malcolm handled himself. There was a way in which he handled himself, you know. It wasn't so much the substantive content of what he talked about. It was just that every time they would ask him a question that was crooked, he'd straighten it out and answer it. And one of the questions I just remember, after the program was over, he was just standing around talking. This white woman student walked up and said, "Minister Malcolm, what do you think of James Baldwin?" And Malcolm had this rapid-fire response. He said, well, when a black man emulates or imitates a white man, he gets mixed up. He's right. But when a black man imitates a white woman, he's, man, people broke up laughing. And thing about it, in the evenings he says that he was not anti-James Baldwin. See, Malcolm had a way of stating facts. I mean, the man was constitutionally unable to lie, you know. And so, and there was a reaction. People like jumped out smiling and so forth, you know. But I felt no hostility on his part, you know, toward Baldwin, you know. And the thing I just want to like really establish with what the meaning of the contact for me was that I rode back to Harlem with him in his car, you know? And because I happened to be coming back to Harlem where I lived, hang out and everything, and also to me it was a privilege to ride up to Harlem with him, you know. In fact, I exchanged some work I'd been doing on a study on busing and things of that nature. And but when I got back to the college, the attitude of many of my white peers and black peers was modified because I rode back to Harlem with Malcolm. In fact, what happened, Malcolm cleaned up my communication with a whole bunch of people. See, a lot of white people are always trying to check out to make sure if you're still a nigger. Like their whole relationship with you is trying to make sure you're still a nigger. You know? And a lot of blacks who are trying to preserve that nigger status, you know, want to make sure you don't embarrass them, you know. Like I remember I'd go to faculty meetings and I would ask a question. Some of the black faculty would take me on the side and say, listen, why'd you ask that question? It's because it's a legitimate question. You know? They felt you were exposing their calmness, their submissiveness by being your own person, you know. And so after that, you know, a lot of the ridiculous inquiries that I got ended, you know. And so I want to thank Brother Malcolm for saving me a whole lot of time with a lot of people, and that was one of his powers. You know, like if you have a picture of Malcolm up in your office, people walk in, they treat you just a little different. I mean, they don't come off the wall like they would ordinarily, like they had a plan to, you know, deal with you as a nigger, you know. And it's like when the afro first came out. You know, if you wore an afro, man, people start, they figure you're a little more militant, you know, and they wouldn't say certain things and so forth. And I maintain that even now that, you know, having a photograph of Malcolm on your wall is a very important statement, because you're stating something about your own sense of, your own right to be whom you want to be. Because that's what Malcolm fought for, the right of people to be whom they were, even if they were against him, okay? Because he respected people who made decisions of their own in their own interests. You know, like yesterday, we went on the 30th pilgrimage to Grace site. I couldn't help but be moved by the fact that there were so many people there, still honoring this brother in death 30 years after. He showed up at a lot of places on the sidelines, but he was not actually participating. Picket line, school immigration, Washington, Selma, he was on the sidelines. Because he had to be where his people were.
Malcolm was suspended from the Nation of Islam for 90 days, told not to speak. And then in early 1960s,
was doing to us, analyze the things that were happening to us, and try to place them into proper perspective.
I'm reminded that Malcolm didn't speak for us, he spoke as us. A lot of leaders don't understand that. They think they got to come up with what you got to think. Malcolm pulled out of your stomach, out of your mind, out of your experiences, things you thought you wanted to hear about what was happening to you. And often when you're standing in the audience, if somebody says, "Are you saying that out loud?"
But I'm not the kind of person to come here to say what you like. I'm going to tell you the truth, whether you like it or not.
He didn't abandon his religion. He didn't change his. When you consider that instead of being a minority, an oppressed minority, you're a part of the majority.
A lot of people don't behave as though Malcolm recognized that he was an American, with the full rights that every other American. And the fact that he wanted to go before the United Nations as an American reveals that. He wasn't saying they were treating him as an American, but he was saying he had a legitimate claim on being an American. And so he and Martin agreed that they should go before the United Nations and present the violations of our human rights before the United Nations. And I would have loved to have seen Martin and Malcolm speaking from the General Assembly side by side.
So our next move?
My lifetime, and I was fortunate enough to be exposed to Malcolm.
So I think the finest thing about Malcolm is that they thought they could silence him by killing him, and they have not silenced him, even though he's no longer here. And that to me is a measure of his strength. Because they tried to buy him off. They finally had no choice.
Even when they offered him $1 million to not stop what he...
Max.
He was not only for black people. He was for freedom for everybody or freedom for nobody. Yeah. And he wasn't only against his own oppression. He was against all oppression. For instance, like he was not anti-white. He was anti-racist.
Malcolm said the change.
Anytime you beg another man to set you free, you will never be free. Freedom is something that you have to do for yourself.
These marker remains to earth the common mother of all, secure in the knowledge that what we place in the ground is no more now a man.
Dear Malcolm, I just wanted to say I miss you in this world. Wow. And if you are in heaven smiling down upon us, I just like to say thank you for trying to restore peace. Also, I wrote a poem after you. Golly.
I hear that now.
What a man. Boy, oh boy.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, you folks have a good day.
Okay, same to you.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm standing on a mountain, looking out upon the land, thinking of all the fruit and goodness that is given unto man. I see love all over the flowers. I hear a song from the buzzing bee, yeah. And peace is all around me, but there's no peace for you and me. No, there ain't no trouble on the mountain, no. And that's where I wanna go. Hey, but I just can't rest on the mountain top when there's trouble down here below. Yeah, yeah. From the honeybee, you can sit in the shade of a shady tree, yeah. There's no gift in the heart of a man who make me fight to be free, yeah. Oh, on the mountain is where I wanna go and leave my troubles here below. Oh, there ain't no trouble on the mountain, no, and that's where I wanna go. Hey, but I just can't rest on the mountain top when there's trouble down here below. Yeah. From the honeybee, you can sit in the shade of a shady tree, yeah. But there's no gift in the heart of a man who make me fight to be free, yeah. Oh, on the mountain is where I wanna go and leave my troubles down here below. But I know that running would be half a man, so I'm gonna stay and take my stand. Oh, there ain't no trouble on the mountain, no, and that's where I wanna go. Oh, but I just can't rest
I'm glad. That's why I'm determined to build that museum right here. We've been meeting with the developers that's taking over because we gonna tell our story. We gonna preserve our story. Nobody gonna tell the story of Milton Galamerson and A. Kendall Smith and Herb Daughtry. We gonna tell that story so they'll have it for generations to come. I ain't talking about the story of the Southern movement. I'm talking about right here. I'm talking about Queen Mother Moore and Preston Wilcox. There got to be a house that tells our children that story, and that is what we're going to do right here. Because somebody, I love the museum in Washington. I love what they just built in the South, but something needs to be in New York that talk about this is what black folk went through and others that struggle went through. They won't tell it because we struggled against them. That's why Daughtry was controversial. That's why I was controversial. We was fighting the folk that was forming public opinion. Hello. So they could empathize with fight Archie Bunker down south. But up south, they didn't want to tell you we wasn't allowed to go in Bensonhurst. Up south, we weren't allowed to go in Howard Beach. That's the fights we fought. But God preserved us and kept us so we could tell the story.